Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, joined this evening for a live stream by Nathan from the far east, the land of the rising sun. He goes under the name of FAUXTAKU Lounge. He got in touch with me recently with a very interesting idea. He suggested that we talk about the perceptions of nationalists regarding Japan, and suggested that we should look into the reality of this situation there, and perhaps learn a bit about what this place is that so many people seem to, pull out of their hip pocket as an example of national interests being catered to, if you will. There are any number of ways people have come at it. I'm certainly no expert on it, but to me, it sounded interesting. I've been to Japan, and when I was a lad living out in San Francisco, I was part of a taiko group, a performance group. So I got to learn a little bit about Japanese culture through that as well. And so this all, seemed like a great opportunity for me to learn something. And so I hope it will be for you, dear viewers, as well. Before I get started, please follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as A Safer Space. You can do that on BitChute. You can do that on YouTube. There is Minds. There is Gab. There is Twitter. There is Parler. There are all of these social media platforms. So feel free to follow me there. Nathan, as I understand it, you can follow for the time being at FAUXTAKU Lounge. I will post that down in the show notes here. I should have done that already. I'm sorry. Those of you who came over from Twitter, you will see his Twitter link there. And I should shill my books. There's a science fiction book set in a dystopian future. It's called Vinculum by Oliver Perrin. And there is my collection of poems, Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. You can pick this up on Amazon as well under Oliver Timken Perrin. And I believe that has my shilling taken care of. So I know our guest is putting his show notes together. But if he is ready here, I'll offer you an opportunity, Nathan, to say hello to our audience and share with them anything that you want to say about yourself before we get started. Maybe you can let us know how somebody ended up in Japan. Where are you from? Who are you? Just sort of, shake hands and say hello to people. Give them a sense of where you're coming from.
All right. Here's my hand. Shake it, I guess. My name's Nathan. I've always, thank you very much, by the way, for the long and storied and not quite chilly enough for your book, by the way. It's a good book. We'll talk about later, I hope. I was born in Sweden many years ago, now 41. I turned 41 today, by the way. Drinking a Japanese sake for that. Not sake, sorry. Japanese malt whiskey for that.
I was about to say, if it's sake, somebody else had to pour it for you, right? Happy birthday, man.
Thank you very much. I was. My parents were missionaries on the field. And you might be like, what do Swedes need to, the missionary for? There's a Bible school down in southern Sweden. Any Swede in that area probably heard of it. But we went back to the States. My parents are American. I say my parents. Technically I'm American. Grew up in Colorado and California after Sweden, and then we moved to Canada when I was 15, and now I'm in Japan. I'm married. Okay, so here's the thing, and this is something of a thing that's come up recently in our circles, at least, if I may call it our circles, is I'm married to a Japanese national, but I do consider myself a nationalist. Now, I don't think I could possibly consider myself a, those numbers and all that, but just because it wouldn't exactly be fair, not living in a place, not representing in a place, but a general nationalist, I suppose you would call myself. Anyway, I'm here. My wife works in biological research, and I'm a photographer, and this is my studio. I usually shoot for magazines, as well as when a new manufacturer comes out with a new product, I shoot it to make it look really nice so that people want to buy it. And that's probably how I would want to sort of introduce myself. I have a YouTube channel. I talk about cameras and audio stuff. It's called FAUXTAKU Lounge. That's it. Yeah. Oh, I can't hear you.
You'd think I've done this before, right? So how long is it that you've been in Japan? So when we listen to you make observations about what you've seen there and the rest, on what basis are you making those observations? Just so we understand, how long have you been there? Do you speak Japanese? I can say hajimemashite, watashi wa kore wa desu, or ohayou gozaimasu. That's it.
It is actually the middle of the day, yeah. So I've been here for 8 years, I think, roughly, since 2012, I believe. Beginning in 2012, and I lived before that for a couple of years off and on. did university here for 1 year. I worked teaching English, or not teaching English. They call it teaching, but you just sit next to a real English teacher, and he's like, 皆さん、猫のことは英語でキャットと言います。皆さん繰り返して言いましょう。キャット. And then everyone's like, キャット. And then he's like, Nathan, say the real one. I'm like, cat. And then they say cat. And then so I did that for a year. First time it came was 1999, which I was a 19-year-old really bushy hair guy. I didn't wake up to anything political until much later in life, sometime in my 30s. Japan is it's a very interesting place. The first time you come. Well, actually, have you been here? I believe you.
Yes, yeah. I've been there once, just a few days, Tokyo only. I was very, very impressed by the translator I worked with. The team. She had a full command of idiom, had excellent pronunciation, translated at speed, very, very quickly, as well as the best of the translators I had worked with in other countries for the field research. And I said, how long did you live in the U.S.? And she's like, oh, I've never been. So, yeah, it was very impressive. There were some odd things, perhaps in the course of the discussion, it'll come up and I can ask my questions about it. But I guess this is a good point, since you've got your street cred. You've lived there for a while. You have a Japanese wife. It appears you speak Japanese, and you've had some Japanese, and you've had.
Yeah, they have. Sorry, but I'm interrupting you. Like I said,
not at all.
It's going to be a problem because I haven't done this thing in a long time. I speak like I would speak. If you meet me on the street, you'd be like, oh, he's fluent. But as soon as you talk to me about like how to change a tire, something simple that everyone should know how to do and should be able to explain in a language, he was like, wait, this guy doesn't actually speak Japanese. So I speak normal Japanese between people about subjects that are not terribly technically fairly well. But as soon as you get into talking about, just normal things that you should know in real life, like I don't even know how to say a lever in Japanese, how to leave it.
Yeah, I have the same experience from living in Turkey for some time. I have a pretty good pronunciation, and I can speak for normal things. And then as soon as you move into anything with a specialized vocabulary, that's why you see most translators, they'll have like a special dictionary for electrical terms, a special dictionary for medical terms. As you move me over into philosophy and, unless somebody happens to know some shared heritage of Latin terms, I'm screwed. So, hello, exactly. Where's the bathroom? How much does it cost? Thank you very much. Sure. A little better than that, but yeah. I hear where you're coming from. Okay, so I guess the first point, where the best place to start with this, I would think, and tell me if you agree, would be to at first sketch how it is that Japan is seen by people who don't live there. The kind of people who say, well, ethno-nationalism, or let's just strip it and say nationalism, because ethno is rather redundant. Most people who bring up Japan do so to say, for example, that this is an example of a properly nationalist country that defends its interests and these other things. But I don't know all that much about it. I'm not, and this is a scene, so to speak, that I've only been involved with for a few years. So you living in Japan, you probably have a sensitive ear for it and have heard it any number of times. Let's start with the way in which Japan is generally seen and talked about, so that we have something to draw a contrast with when you start talking about your experiences there.
All right, that's a pretty good starting point. So I've noticed now I do as an advertising photographer, do a lot of editing, do a lot of stuff that doesn't require to interact with people, and this is how I got into the whole YouTube thing, like listening to YouTube. Eventually, I went from like listening to like lost episodes for some reason to listening to people like Sargon of Akkad and all that. And he was not my my conduit to this area. It might have been Millennial Woes or somebody like that. But basically, over the course of time, certainly the last 2 or 3 years, I've noticed, at least in the national circles, when people talk about, we want, let's say, a white space, we want a country for whites, we want something like that. People they'll offer up sort of dreams of utopia that don't exist in the world, and then they will offer up something maybe like, they'll say something like Korea or Japan. And I've lived in both places, and I don't know so much about Korea. I was only there for 2 years, don't speak the language. But Japan, I've been here for around 8. And even in the short time I've been here, let's say in the 8 years, plus when I first came just to visit for 1 month in 1999, I can tell you the differences. One is that in 1999, even in the center of Yokohama, which is a large city of, I think if you include the larger area, the city area, something like 4 million people, roughly. I could be wrong. Maybe it's a little bit more, maybe it's a little bit less. But I could walk anywhere, and there was only one place I would find other foreigners. One would be the church I was at, and it was an international church. It was basically probably 30% Japanese, so that's different. And the other place was basically the Yokohama Station on Friday nights when they had musicians come in. And there was some like b-boy dancers or whatever, the people that spin like tops on their heads. There were some, you know, some Africans there, and there were some whites here and there playing guitar and all that. But it was Japanese, like really Japanese. You went to Tokyo, and it was still really Japanese. Now, for me to say that, my perspective living here is probably quite a bit different from a person visiting. So a person visiting would be like, but Japan is really Japanese. Okay. 1999, it was, I don't know the percentage back then, the way that accounting is done and how to find all the Japanese records, etc., is a little bit difficult. But basically, from what I've seen with my own eyes, I can go now into a convenience store out on the outskirts of Tokyo, and there'll be a foreigner working at the cash register. Never saw that before. And if you go down to Tokyo, you're going to see sections there are sections of the city which are black. There's sections of the city which are like Middle Eastern. There's sections of the city which are, you know, almost like a Chinatown, but not in the official touristy Chinatown, like another one. And then there's some statistics that you can find on, I wish I brought that with me. I didn't have it, that there's something almost like 1 out of 8 people born in Japan, in Tokyo area right now, or in the Tokyo area, or, sorry, young people in Tokyo area are from abroad if they're under 20. Now, if you just take a random look around the city, depending where you go, you can go to places which are very Japanese, but it's very, very quickly turning into basically like what Sweden was when I left. And when I left, it was below 5% non-Swedes. It is now approaching 40%. And I'm not sure how much you want me to go forward at the moment. I can add a couple of more things onto this point. Yeah.
Well, did we jump over the part where you were where we were going to get some sense of of the way Japan is seen by others from the outside?
Okay, so yeah, that was me laying the groundwork. Sorry, thank you, my man. That was me laying the groundwork for me to say this. A lot of nationalists who are talking on YouTubes and all sorts of places like that, Twitter, this and that, podcast or whatever, will bring up Japan as sort of like a high point. So we want to have a white ethno-state like Japan has a Japanese ethno-state. And it's always coming up like Japan for the Japanese. And this is in Japan, they always take care of the Japanese. There's 97% Japanese, only 3% foreigner is another one that I hear a lot. And that's true. That is true. And that may sound like heaven to a lot of nationalists out there. But I want to suggest that Japan is not a great one to bring up as sort of a benchmark for all of us to look up to. And that's where I would probably expand this story into, well, that 1 in 8 is, young people under 20 who are not born in, but in Tokyo or born abroad. That's a stat. There's a whole bunch of things that we can go to from here to explain how Japan has been completely subverted, and the groundwork is basically laid for it to become like another a vassal state. In other words, of like, maybe not America or whatever, but like it is essentially not Japanese. It's got a Japanese people element, and that element is rapidly shrinking. And I can go from there.
Yeah, I kind of want to get some background for myself. I look at, my own experience in Japan. I was like, well, don't people have their rituals? I see people burning incense, and what is it? It's Shinto, isn't it? Which is essentially sort of like the national religion, and everybody just sort of, they didn't laugh. They're far, far too polite for that, but they sort of, gave you this, the friendly patronizing look of saying, no, of course, these are rituals that everyone adheres to, but we wouldn't really call it religious, you know? And then I noticed, like, when I went walking around, in addition to just, insane thin fabric mini skirts that are just up so damn high. It's like all bone white legs on display in all directions. I noticed lots of worked up sort of exercised street preacher types. And, you know, it'd be a Japanese woman talking about God and all the rest. And you know, seeing what I saw with Shinto being something that was a formal observation, but not necessarily. I'm outside, and I recognize that, but I got the sense that people, you know, that's something that they do because it's been done and it's proper to do it, not necessarily that they're filled with some religious conviction. And then seeing, you know, someone who did seem to have a religious conviction, who was speaking to crowds of people in a shopping district about Christianity, but a Japanese woman. And then I go out, I think I was in Roppongi. Is that the, like, you know, nightclubs and bars and
I think districts? That was it used to be like a really historic area with a lot of beautiful old Japanese buildings, and they tore those down and put in the shopping mall, you know. And it's a place where a lot of foreigners gather and have like really expensive nightclubs and stuff like that, if I understand correctly. I passed through it.
Go ahead, please.
I'm 41, man. I don't do that stuff no more.
Yeah, I'm older, so I don't even want to hear it. But I did notice when I was there, and this was just like 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there were just crowds of Nigerians on the street. So that was the last thing I was going to want to throw in. Is you got a nightclub area with crowds of Nigerians. You've got people who are observing their national traditions, but it seemed in a somewhat empty way. And I can't speak for all of them. I'm sure there are people for whom it's not like that, but that's my initial impression. And then the business of the street preacher. I have to think back to the period with the Marshall Plan, and well, not the Marshall Plan, but the Reconstruction, or maybe it did fall under the Marshall Plan. I don't know. That's probably just for Europe. But Japan certainly underwent Reconstruction, and there was a considerable amount of social reconstruction as well. And you had already seen phases of that prior to World War II with the adoption of Western military techniques and, you know, some aspects of Western military order. So it seems like for quite some time that Japan has been sort of flipped and turned and transformed, and most drastically transformed with very little continuity with the past in terms of this phase after World War II. And so it seems to me that, how do I say this? I'm going to turn it over to you here, but it has always seemed to me somewhat questionable that people would talk about Japan, at least in the cultural sense of having that connection to their past, because it seems to be as screwed up as a city that Godzilla got done just recently walking through. You know, it seems that they're grappling with a lot, and that sense of identity. And last bit is my taiko teacher. You know, I'm thinking, you know. Tanaka-san, you know, he's a serious old dude and he knows how to play on the big drums, you know, the okedo and everything, you know, daiko. And serious guy, must be into Japan. And, you know, he's talking about meeting his friends after a show and he's going to go have drinks. And I was like, well, what does, you know, Tanaka-sensei drink? And they're all, you know, is he drinking sake at a mochi pounding festival? And they're like, oh, no, he went off to hang out with bikers and drink whiskey. So, you know, my early impressions were that a lot of this perception that we have in the West doesn't hold. So that's my introduction. That's what little I know about it. So what's really going on there, both in terms of the culture and in terms of the ethnic homogeneity, which it seemed like you wanted to touch on as well.
Right. Well, that was great. I live in a, how would I describe it? I don't know. Where are you from again?
I'm from the South, the U.S. South. My family's from New Orleans on both sides, but I live in Georgia now.
Okay, I don't know any examples from down there. But have you been to Los Angeles?
Yeah.
Oh wait, you know what? That's not a good example. I don't know that either. Have you been to Toronto?
Yes.
Okay. So if you let's just say this is Toronto for Tokyo. If you went to Toronto, when my family moved there in 1996, it was all farmland right outside, and now it's basically what are they called, suburbs right out there. Well, the city I live in now would be like, in terms of Toronto, would be like not Barrie. Barrie is like a city that was way outside of Toronto that got connected by suburbs, but it's close. It's like almost like it's like a city that existed out there. It got connected by suburbs, but it wasn't terribly far away. It's 50 or 60 kilometers from the last outskirts of Tokyo, and right in this city. And I'm on right next to a rice area, in this area where there are like 100 houses, this suburb or whatever you call it, there are how many? We got Venezuelans, Peruvians, Germans, Indians, myself. We have a half French, half Japanese, Brazilian. And that's just in my side of the larger area. So that's probably out of, let's say, 60 houses. That may not sound like a lot for you guys where you've had multiculturalism for a lot longer, but it is like almost, I would say, about of anyone that comes into this specific area, half of them are foreign, basically, right into this tiny little suburb. And in the city I live in, it's a science city, so there are a lot of people that come in who are like university students, etc. But this is we're just talking about people at the moment. But the government recently expanded its foreign workers program, and I do have a chart. I don't know if you want to share it. The papers were talking about it just about a year ago, and it was essentially under Abe-san, in just 6 years, I think that he was in power or whatever, the number of foreign workers expanded at a rate that was, sorry, not a rate. The rate, I don't know how to do the maths for, but it was 300% of what it was before he came in, and that was in just 6 years. That's that's not the total number of foreigners. That's the foreign workers plus some other visa holders. I think that was like the spouses, etc. So this is the visa that he expanded, and I think the chart that I supplied, it would be actually, if you look from 2008 to 2020, it would be 300%.
Sorry, trying to pull that up right now. Sorry,
yeah. Oh, yeah, no problem.
I'm slow with this. Is this Japan 1 JPEG? It's not showing to me. Let's just see if I can. Screen 1, screen 2, screen 3. Which one is it? Let's call it screen 1.
Sure.
That's the one. There we are. So hopefully everybody can see this. Sorry, this is all slack and amateurish. Let me see if I can scale it up. There we go. You guys should be able to see it.
Yeah. So this, I'm looking. Yeah, actually, you've got it up there, so I don't need to show it. Yeah. So this one, it shows it's just, these are just foreign workers right here that basically just came in. You can see the chart starts from 2008, and at that time there were 500,000 foreign workers. Now that's not the foreigners in Japan. That's just the foreign workers. At the moment it's 1,700. Now these are, depending on how, you'll talk with somebody and they'll definitively be like, these are people that have visas and they'll go home. But we know how, at least in the West, we know how that started. It started with, foreign temporary workers who come in, and now we have, 30%, 20%, 40% foreign workers, just up maybe 30 years later. And you can tell that the acceleration vector is really going up from basically 2014. That's about when Abe came in, maybe it was 2013. And at the moment, we do have, it is 97% ethnic Japanese. And after that, the number of visible foreigners is basically up to about 1.5%. When I came here originally, it was way down below 0.5%. In fact, it was probably about 0.3%. And so that was in 20 years. So that 0.3 to 1 to 1.5. We basically have, that's a 5-fold increase of just visible ones. The non-visible ones, actually, it's kind of funny to say non-visible, because what non-visible would be like a Chinese or Koreans coming in, or perhaps mixed. And it's interesting to say non-visible because maybe when you've traveled to Europe, you recognize it. Like back when I used to live in Sweden, you'd be like, oh, that's a German. You could be like 100 meters away and they couldn't be saying anything. You look at them, that's a German. And then you look at that, that's a Norwegian. And they start speaking, sure enough, they're German or they're Norwegian. And in Japan, yeah, you'll look around and they're the same, Asian or whatever, but they're not, they're not the Japanese, they're, Chinese or Korean or whatever. But that numbers is going up really fast. And what kind of, if you follow this chart at this rate, we're going to be looking up at around 10% foreign workers at this in 5 or 6 years. And if you follow 10 years or 15 years later, we're going to be looking at around 20%, if the rate goes as fast as it is. And it slowed down a little bit in 2020, obviously for a bunch of reasons.
Now the number we're talking about, you said it was something like 1.7, and so that's roughly 1,700,000 foreign workers that we're talking about. Am I reading this number
so
right?
At the moment, as you can see in the chart, it's 1,700,000, which is just the number of temporary workers that have basically come in or that are in the country at the moment. And that doesn't mean that they they were not here before 2008 or whatever. Sometimes the visas, basically, they started out like 1 year, 2 year, and then they got longer and longer and longer, as you know, as they will go. And then some of the people, how do I describe it? The foreigners that are, I'm going to go all over the place. So I'm going to go all over the place. I don't want to go too far on that part right at the moment, except to say this. A lot of, if you can look at the chart, one thing to look at is manufacturing. And this is kind of, it sounds great, right? You got foreigners coming in, they're doing manufacturing, they're either doing factory work, or they're doing some other sort of, not make work, but, like putting stuff together. This is a scary number. And the reason why I think this is a scary number is because that's a number that you don't see. So you or me, if we were regular Japanese people on the street, we, go to work, we buy our stuff at the convenience store, we go to a restaurant, we come back, and, we do see a gradual increase of foreigners who are maybe some, what do they call it? The person that comes in, not a co-op, but a person that comes in to help at your company for a while, or work at your company for a while. You see them here and there. You see people at the convenience store. You go to a restaurant and you see maybe a worker, a server, something like that, and they're coming in, and that's all right. But the manufacturing business is something that only the manufacturers will ever see. So you won't see, for instance, you're not going to see who's making your car, who's making your made in Japan, I don't know, plastic stuff. You're not going to see any of that. It's going to say made in Japan. You're like, all right, it's made in Japan. And then later on, if the Japanese people, and they will eventually before they're demonized, will say something like, wait a second, maybe we should slow this down. And what's going to happen is both the people on the progressive left or whatever, and maybe the government will be like, well, if we slow this down, what's going to happen is it's going to really impact our manufacturing business. And we're a manufacturing country. And that's kind of like the Trojan horse is the manufacturing industry. Whatever you see up front, like the convenience stores and this and that, that's kind of to make you upfront lose some of your hostility to, if you have it, toward a foreigner. Because they're doing a good job. They're handing me my money. They're speaking Japanese. They got me my cigarettes, this and that. The person that got me my food at the restaurant, got it to me quickly like that. And then when it comes to the back end, the ones that you don't see, that's the number that increases the fastest. And it's also the one that you don't know is actually supporting a lot of the major industries within the country. And
what, if I may ask,
yes.
What is the situation? These are people who are here on in Japan on some kind of work visa, and,
right.
and so the work visa runs for a certain period of time. I think back with the 2008, you were talking about a year or 2 years. What are the Japanese people looking at this point in terms of how long these people are coming in for?
Well, it really depends. The visa system is always being updated. For instance, when I did a stint of teaching for 1 year, and you could get an extension for 1 year up to 3 years, and then whilst I was there, it went up to 4 years, and now there's 5 years. And of course, whilst you're here as a foreign worker, and there's a lot of foreign workers. In fact, there was even a Black Lives Matter demonstration a couple of months ago. There was I think it was a Kurdish guy that did something, and then he was like, I can't breathe. And we got loads of people here. And the moment, how do I say this? Those people are always going to agitate for their own, as we know, everyone's going to always agitate for their own kind and for what they figure their kind wants. And as soon as you get foreign workers here for, let's say, over a year, maybe even a year, those foreign workers, say from Bangladesh or from Canada or whatever, they are going to always compare Japan to their home country. If you come here visiting, you're going to be like, oh man, it's pretty cool. It's clean. You can get good food anywhere. It's cheap for, food, etc. But once you live here, you're like, I really wish this were different and this were different. And that's when you start you basically get collectivization of the foreigners against the Japanese. And it does go in some ways racially, it goes politically. But yeah, the longer those foreigners are here, and their visas are always being updated. So like I said, it was 1 year, then you could extend it for up to 3 years, and then 4 years, and now 5 years. Depends on the industry as well. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer, but all of these groups of people are getting to have a certain amount of representation. That the Japanese, of course, no native in any country has, no one has outside representation to agitate on their behalf.
But for example, the people who run the industries that employ them and who depend upon them become their mouthpieces, presumably.
You know, I don't know how that works. I don't know how that relation is. I haven't worked in a factory, etc. But you can read between the lines, like when, say, for instance, Toyota, or like we're proud to now employ, let's say, 10,000 foreign laborers, and you know, the regular papers will give you plaudits for that sort of thing because you're doing something progressive, and then the regular people probably won't really care as long as they're getting their Toyotas, etc. But yeah, the backbone, that sort of manufacturing backbone in Japan, by and large, is worked by Japanese nationals. But the number of foreigners that are coming in who are doing that work is very quickly multiplying. And like I said, there's basically there's like two groups of foreigners basically here, if you want to just divide it very quickly and very simply. There's the Japanophile, and that's a person that comes in, they love anime, they I don't know, they dress up as like a samurai on Halloween, etc. And by the way, there's huge Halloween parties here in Japan, which again, like the preaching on the street, contrast the Christian preacher who's got a lot of faith and she has a lot of gusto, and then you contrast that with the person who's going to the Shinto shrine and praying. So you have I think the largest Halloween parties here, and at the same time you have this growing number of foreigners, the ones that love Japan, but the ones that are just regular foreigners coming in, and there's a lot of them because the government is constantly increasing the number of foreigners that can come in to do anything. They'll do farming contracts where they'll teach a lot of the Africans in this city that I live in will come in to learn farming techniques, and they will take it back, hopefully, to their own countries, if those people go back, and if they've learned anything, if they're not just here to play. But those people, a lot of these normal people, want Japan to be like what they hear on the news of other places, or if they come from Canada or they come from anywhere in Europe, they want Japan to be even more liberal, more progressive. Recently, I was on Facebook, and there's this guy complaining he wants to go to a fitness place, and he was really upset that the person who rejected him is like, no, we only accept what she says, only Japanese here. And maybe what she meant was you have to be able to speak Japanese, and that makes sense. It's Japan. But even if it was we only accept Japanese people here, in Japan, that should make sense. And the fact that we have to that anyone should have to defend that about their own country is a problem. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons. Maybe say, the Japanese are generally very polite, as you will have noticed from being here. But let's say if you go to a fitness place, maybe in Canada, you don't shower in the same way. You don't wipe down in the same way. You leave things a little bit dirtier here and there. And maybe the Japanese have had enough experience with foreigners to be like, it's just a little bit too sticky. But the foreigners will take every slight difference between their life in Canada or Great Britain or Africa or whatever and Japan, and they'll be like, they'll see that, they'll multiply it by 100, and then they'll say it has to change. And the Japanese never think about these things. And why should they? It's their own country.
So I have, if I could jump in, I have an anecdote that I think fits there. I was staying at a hotel in Tokyo. It's a very nice hotel. Can't remember the name of it, but quite nice, but immaculately clean. I mean, if there's anything I learned, it's that, a people who in their film industry show the seriousness of someone's mental crisis by showing them have a hair out of place. Like that's a theme with the Japanese. It's like, when the woman starts going crazy, parts of the hair fall down and they aren't neatly kept back. A group of people who, I guess they have some special school they go to fold things perfectly. My experience was just like, good God, the way in which they treat textiles, the care, you offer things up very carefully, and particularly in one way. This group of people is clean and orderly and polite. And I was staying at the hotel. I got on the elevator because I saw that's where the club was. And so I was going to roll up there and exercise a little bit before retiring to the room for the night, go back for more field work the next day.
Eh?
Pardon me?
You're keeping on topic here. I'm talking about the studios, and you're like, I was going to exercise. It's cool. I like it.
Well, I went up to work out, and I got up there, and I'm on the machines, and I'm like working out away, and I look at the little notice in English on it. This is a nice hotel, and I'm up there. There's no one in the exercise room. So I figured that's fine, but I'm working out. I'm wearing a tank top, and I have tattoos all over me. And I look at the little workout machines, and the sign says no tattoos. I don't know if it's Yakuza or if it's just, considered poor form, whatever it is. I don't know. And I suddenly realized, wow, I'm probably not this culturally. I probably should shift this out. I'm going to piss someone off. Anyway, so I finish exercising. I'm covered with sweat. I go over to the elevator. It wasn't like they had a gym elevator. And the top floor where the exercise area was also like a kind of clubhouse rental place if you're having a wedding reception or whatever. And so I'm waiting for the elevator, dripping with sweat. They can probably smell the stinky, gaijin food that I eat coming out of my dirty gaijin body. And I'm waiting on to get on the elevator to go down to my floor. And there are these just, beautifully dressed people who are up there for some event, probably something related to a wedding. And I'm having to think about how I'm going to get on the elevator with them, and they're all just, not even looking at me. Like I'm not going to look, and maybe when I look back, you'll be gone. And so I got the sense definitely that there are plenty of ways to step wrong, to trip over your shoelaces in terms of dealing with the culture and not having a clear sense of what's going on. So I have to add the second part of this, which was when the client that I was working with and my colleague and I, this was like 4 or 5 people, we decided to go out for drinks after a day of working. And we had just finished up where we were. And this is to that thing of telling people that if you're not Japanese, you can't be here. We had picked out this place. We were just walking around. We're like, let's find a bar. It looks good that we can walk into, And we saw this place that looked interesting. It was a nice little spot. It had a long bar and a few tables off on one side, big glass front to the thing. It's one of these locations in a shopping mall type arrangement. And so we walk in and we go in the front door and we kind of look around foolishly like tourists do. Like, is someone going to come up and hand us a menu? Is someone going to come seat us? How is this going to work? We look around and I've told this story on my channel before, this immaculately dressed dude, with almost form, black bow tie, white shirt, and a black apron. And he comes zooting up to us and he just holds the door open for us that we've just come in. He holds it open for us. And yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. Yes, please. And so we step out and he shuts the door and walks off. Yeah. And I was like, I just got thrown out in the most polite way that's ever happened in my life. So I get the impression, my experience was that the culture, they still do, I don't think it's necessarily that you can't speak Japanese. I got the sense, and tell me if I'm wrong, that there are just certain places that are for Japanese.
Yeah, I should probably add that let's say 6 years ago or so, before I had my own red pill moment, I was a little bit. I used to go to World Cup football matches. They had the Women's World Cup here, and I think they had under 17s, and then they had some local matches. And I remember watching one team called the Reds. Now, of course, this is football, right? And football's it's a foreign sport. It's gaining in popularity here against another foreign sport, baseball. But I remember going there, and they had a huge flag for the Reds, and they would they'd wave it, and then there'd be a door right in there, and it said "No foreigners." And at the time, as a regular progressive, not at this moment, I look back at my time there. I'm like, I was at the time I thought I was pretty radical. But looking back now, I was basically milquetoast progressive. But back then I was like, how dare they? How dare they? Like that. Everyone should be able to go everywhere they want. Now, I was always a nationalist in terms of like, in Sweden should be Swedes, in Canada should be, what Canadians should be, But at the same time, whilst living here in Japan, I had this progressive hang up, and it was everywhere should be accessible by all sorts of people, and that's of course just a completely liberal idea, but. Whenever I'm with a group of foreigners, and I'm a foreigner, right? I don't hang out just with Japanese. I am a foreigner. I am in my own. I have a lot of reservations about my own status here, basically. But when you're with a bunch of foreigners, you're always going to find the ones that are more respectful of the place and the ones that are not respectful. And it is by and large the latter one, especially online. There's a whole bunch of channels that I watch that are in Japanese by foreigners, actually. Of course, again, foreigner, right? I'm just going to be drawn to that. And they're all super progressive, basically. There's none that are. Everyone wants Japan to be more English, or whatever England has become. They want it to be more inclusive, and but they still love Japan. They love Japan. They love it. They love how people are polite. They love how it's clean. They love how the food is cheap but good anywhere. They love all these things that really are Japanese, but they want it to be more open to foreigners. And it's like, at what point do you decide that Japan is the way it is because it is Japanese? And I mean Japanese in the national sense rather than the descriptive sense of a modern state, etc. And there's a lot of people that if you ask that question, they're like, it would still be Japanese even if it was 50% Japanese people.
Yeah, well, that's the idea that you can basically fill up Britain with Windrush immigrants, and it'll still be the UK. I mean, a certain amount of a minority population apparently can be tolerated within the typical national frameworks without them drifting too far. But the idea that we could just basically bring all of Nigeria to Japan and that it would be Japan is patently absurd. But now, what you're telling me tends to argue in the other direction than I thought we would be going in, because I'm hearing that there still is an ethnic supermajority of more than 90%. I'm hearing that there are still places where the Japanese are like Japanese only, no foreigners, even in the midst of this pressure. I'm hearing that the working population that comes in is essentially limited in terms of its visas to something like maybe 5 years max. They may reapply and come back, but the bottom line is that, I had to do that in Turkey. While I was in Turkey for much of the time, you had to leave every 3 months. And what that does is you can work, more or less officially. It's sort of under the table, but that's how Turkey is. They don't care. I'm sure it's very different in Japan. But the basic idea was that your ass would pop up and be seen and identified and checked on and marked in the ledger once every 3 months. So it's not like you disappeared somewhere. So what I'm hearing from you is a number of things that suggest that Japan still is pretty tight and maybe should be held up as an example by nationalists. So if I'm wrong, maybe throw some of these other angles at me. What things would you present to say, well, it's not maybe as clear as you might have thought?
I think I would probably just say that all of that is really entropic. When I came here, my friends would be complaining all the time at a university, not foreign university, but I went to an international part of university. They complaining, why do I get stopped on the street by police all the time asking for my papers? They complain about that. Now, that doesn't really happen anymore. So basically, yes, it's true that those people that do come in do have to renew, and that those visas they're getting are 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. Now 5 years. It used to be, let's say, 1 or 2 at maximum, but it's now extended to 5. That's going to extend further. I guarantee it. It's also very, very easy to get a spousal visa here. Extremely easy. But that's all just sort of the paperwork part of Japan. If you want to talk about the psychological part of Japan, and this is where I think you can compare what we think of as, well, I mean, this goes for almost any country that's being sort of eroded by multiculturalism, which is why I just want to bring up Japan as well. Japan is no different. It's just that it's farther in the past in terms of, and as you know, you've heard of the Alphaville song, Big in Japan. When things happen in Japan, they happen very fast. And this generally happens in an a nation?
An ethnically homogenous territory.
Thank you very much.
Let's try that.
In an ethnically homogenous territory, especially one that is liberal, and let's just keep in mind that Japan after World War II basically had the constitution, a foreign constitution, basically legoed right on top or right in the middle of their in the middle of their culture, and then from that and outwards expanded very rapidly. Now, before that, there was certain foreign elements, as you mentioned. There was the military. There was the whole industrial status. I mean, we had wholesale. Japanese used to go around the world to learn scientific things, bring them back to Japan. They would bring fashion. They would bring new ways of doing things. They'd come back and they'd do that sort of thing in Japan. That's from Meiji. And then after World War II, they have a foreign constitution, basically legoed right into the middle of the culture. And from that and outward and expanding very rapidly became international capitalism. Now, some people are like, yeah, but the same people that used to be sort of in the feudal age, that used to be sort of the daimyo, etc., are now like the leaders of companies, etc. But at the same time, they're leaders of companies, and those companies no longer have any sort of loyalty to the local area. What Fujifilm do, basically what they do in Japan and what they research in Japan, doesn't matter if, let's say, if their family is tied somehow to the daimyo in the past, they have international responsibilities. And because of that, as you know, now I don't know what I'm not a capitalist, but I don't want to get into that too much, but except that everything is internationally focused, everything. And that means part of that is replacing your internal staff with foreign staff. Part of that is having responsibilities abroad, etc. Part of that is turning your once warrior caste of samurai, as well as your peasant caste of farmers, into basic bitch keyboard warriors. Keyboard, like, at a company, doing spreadsheets, programming spreadsheets, doing design work, maybe designing cameras, etc. But things that have, if you took them away and you took the ability of those people to to earn an income, they literally have nothing that they offer to the country. Where their ancestors used to make things physically, as well as used to farm and fish. And this area, by the way, used to be a big rice farming area, is now becoming a grass farming. So you can put grass around your suburban house, and people are eating a lot of bread. Rice used to be, rice used to be actually in exchange of money. So how in Europe, on your lands, if you were able to take gold and you're able to take other minerals, that counted toward your wealth. Well, in Japan, in the past, they didn't have ability to take out that sort of things very easily from the ground, but rice was the indicator of how much wealth you had on your land if you were a daimyo or something, like one of these leaders, these feudal leaders. And that basically is all just, it's either big rice farmers or small rice farmers, but the amount of rice is being eaten in Japan is low, and every year is getting smaller and smaller. And then those farms are being eaten up, either given to concrete car parks, or to grass farms, or to what are they called? The big meat silos. Not mansion. Mansion's a Japanese word, or the older English word. Apartment complexes, that stuff. All of this stuff is basically the tradition of Japan is shrinking. At the same time, the man that the man looks up to in Japan is, I can't even, what would you describe? There's no man that a man looks up to anymore.
So they're basically, you've lost a number of cultural archetypes, and the connection of those archetypes that people are looking to imitate with the national history grows ever more tenuous, or is gone completely. So what I'm hearing from you is that Japan is in much the same condition as many of the other places in the world that had any kind of identity, and they're beginning to erode it. What I would be curious to hear about, and I don't want to cut you off if you're driving towards some main point, please do feel free to get it out. But I would be curious, have you seen any indications of a reaction? Have you seen any indication of people who are pushing back? I mean, I guess, we joked about it before we started the live call, but, Mishima, was infamously got out there in front of the big world and tried to make a big show. It didn't seem like he got much traction. And he just sort of disappeared, at least for the time being, from many people's awareness. Is there any, does it seem like there is any kind of national consciousness? Is it something way out on the fringes? Is there a Japanese equivalent of a quote unquote alt-right? I mean, I know that a lot of foreigners will think that maybe people in Japan like it, but I've seen that like people in Singapore, I think people in Japan as well, are big into like dressing up in costumes of like Hitler or all kinds of crazy figures because they don't have the kind of taboos associated with it. But in Japan itself, have you seen any kind of an indication that there are Japanese nationalists? And what about the internet? It seems like you're pretty up to date with that. What's going on with that? People in Japan, we already know that they can learn to speak English damn well there under their own steam, because you'll sit in the background and say "katsu" is cat, right? Surely they've gotten on the internet. Surely there are people from Japan who are seeing what's going on around the world. Is there any kind of response on their part that parallels the right-wing pushback that we see in the West?
For a long time, there have been what the word nationalist is really tied to what maybe the English might call like bulldogs or whatever, which is a type of person that talks a lot. And there's these guys that like roll stupid trucks painted with a Japanese flag down the street, and they shout like Japanese slogans. And they're generally the type, they might have tattoos, by the way, but they're like the type of guy who used to be a ruffian back when they were like in their young days, and maybe they work construction or something like that. But there's no, I don't want to say no, but if there is a growing movement like the alt-right, it is extremely small, perhaps still sleeping. That you'll have people, the regular person. Now, this is what's quite nice about Japan is the regular person is still, because it is largely Japanese, and this is just how racism goes. Racism doesn't exist when there's no other races to basically bump up against. It's just not there. So the regular Japanese, they won't worry if they say something in general. They'll like, for instance, if there's a big black guy, muscly, they'll call him a gorilla because he's all muscular, and that's just normal. They'll do that on TV. On TV, they'll say white guys have long noses, and it's like, okay, what's the problem? But at the same time, there's no defense at all, and the TV is much bigger in Japan than it is over in the West. In the West, you basically, as far as I understand, I haven't been there for a while. You have to correct me if I'm wrong. People watch Netflix and they watch Hulu and they watch that sort of thing, but they don't watch the bunny ears or the digital programs quite as much. You don't turn in at 6 p.m. on Saturday night to watch Star Trek: The Next Generation or something like that. Am I right?
My impression is that in the West, it's entirely like, on-demand services. Search for what you want, watch it when you want. There's no sense of, I mean, I guess there's probably some programs where it's going to come out on this night and people still watch. But from what I saw in Japan, it's big with game shows. There's big that social aspect. And I wonder, maybe it's like Turkey when I first moved there, where like people would finish dinner and they'd all go sit on the sofa together to like watch TV. That was their collective moment. I don't know if that's the case in Japan, but they did seem different to me in that respect. There seemed to be a lot more, how do I say it? It seems like there's a lot more TV culture. Like you interacting with it, prizes, talking to people, being interviewed on the street, contests. Is that accurate?
Yeah, There's a lot of variety TV, that sort of thing, and a lot of people will still talk about what happened on TV the other night, stuff like that.
And were you driving towards the suggestion that the television sets the standard for how these people are viewed? Or I cut you off there, so I wanted to.
No problem. Yeah, absolutely. The television absolutely does set a standard in terms of the type of foreigner you get on TV. And there's like these bubbly, beautiful foreigners that come on and they're really good at Japanese. They talk about the weird things. Actually, interestingly, a lot of them talk about the things that they find weird about Japan, and then the Japanese kind of like laugh and like, oh, that is kind of weird. And then it kind of, my guess is a psychological sort of subversion to make those people think, there's a different way of doing things. The Japanese people and the foreigners. So that a lot of their role on TV is to do that. And then a lot of the other ones is basically you see a lot of half caste, or sorry, half whatevers, like my daughter, and it's essentially a slow normalization. But at the same time, because there's actual programs, when a person watches the program, they'll get the news in between, and the news will like really filter out. you think that CNN or Fox or whatever filter things. The stuff that comes in Japan is like the filtered stuff from the filtered stuff you get in the West. So you look at the news and like there is let's say, for instance, some riots happen somewhere. There's only one way to look at it in general, as far as I see on TV, and it's just kind of this neutral thing. Oh, there's a riot, and it happened because of racism. And so you're supposed to basically see people are mad because of racism, and essentially they're not saying it, but they say it. I mean, they don't say it. But the take you're supposed to have is that the white person is bad. Now they don't say it, and people. The funny thing is that's a sort of thing, the discussion that you get on TV. And when you meet a person in real life, they'll talk about that sort of thing. However, because they're more removed from it, I find that Japanese are a little bit more able to talk about anything. So you don't get the emotional reaction. However, you get the sort of reaction that comes from intense and long-term indoctrination, where you say, what do you think about, say, globalization, or like, it's the way of the world. That's basically the reaction I'll get from basically anyone. It's bound to happen. And
right, it's a force of nature. There's nothing you can do about it. And why would you want to change it even if you could? Because it's just how the universe proceeds. Yeah, it seems that there is there was something I noticed there, and perhaps this will fit in. You talk about how insulated they are in certain respects in terms of the information that they get from the outside world. I noticed also that there was this very, very strange paternalism. You know, the collective activities, you know, there'll be, you know, everybody's supposed to go, at like the same time. I can't make the proper sounds, but you can probably think of what they are. They're not just sounds. They're chants. Right, but people will do them together, right? And they'll all kind of go, all together as a group. And it's almost like they had it cued, and you're like, no, they didn't have it cued. They just do it together as a group.
Right.
And there's a kind of a paternalism. I saw endlessly everything that was a public service announcement or statement of any kind that you'd see posted outside as a little tiny iconic cartoon character or a cartoony blob that tells you what to do, to wear a mask or to walk on this side, or, you know, these are bad examples because probably no one in all of Japan spits on the ground, but, you know, don't spit, you know, these kinds of things like that. I saw all kinds of signs, and they were embodied with characters that were cute and approachable.
Right.
And those were the things that were used in this sort of soft sense to direct the population to undertake the best practices or to wear the mask or whatever it was. And when I think about that and I combine it together with what you're talking about the highly filtered newsfeed, it seems like there's a pretty solid government control over public perceptions. And yet at the same, and I'm about to get to asking if that is correct, because at the same time, it seems there's just a vast array of different types of TV shows, but all of them seem really vapid. Are there philosophical Japanese TV shows? Are there interview shows where people talk about, you know, foreign policy and where we should be going? Is there a sense of informed citizenry who vote based upon their reading of the newspaper each morning?
There's no Keith Woods in Japan, is probably what I would say. On TV, you know what's funny? It is vapid, absolutely. And I find that it's, if you don't watch it every day, if you come back to it, say every half year or every 3 months, it is refreshing because it's so lighthearted. There's nothing really to bother about. Now, sometimes you have your TV caster who usually does the news, and they come onto some variety show, and then they'll talk about, you know, my husband used this amount of money and I don't have it anymore. Or you'll have the foreigners talk about, like, and there, when was this? About 6 or 7 years ago, there was a whole sort of revolt about foreigners who are here to teach English, and the companies were cutting their contracts or something like that. And there was this whole like sympathy for foreigners thing. And that would be what the entire country would talk about if they're going to talk about TV for a little while, because that was on everyone's mind. Now, when I say entire, obviously I'm exaggerating, because not everyone in the country is going to watch it. Not everyone's going to watch the same channel, but there is a national dialogue because of the television. One thing, when my mother-in-law was over, and there it's kind of a black pill, she came over to visit her granddaughter, and the first thing she did when there was time, she turned on the TV. It was the first thing she did. My granddaughter's there playing Legos. She wanted to play a board game, or my granddaughter did, and she wanted to play a board game with her grandma. So the first thing her grandma did was turn on the TV. Japanese?
Yes,
yeah, Japanese grandma. And when her grandpa was over as well, same thing. And I'm not sure. I'm sure with my parents, it's become the same thing. And I've had the conversation with my mom-in-law. I've said, the country I was born in, Sweden, is approaching 40% non-foreigners. And even if you watch the regular news and you take what the news say, you'll say it's like because of some horrible racist Swedes that there's explosions in the streets. But that's coming to Japan. Already, I've heard you guys talk about, robberies on the trains, etc., from different groups of foreigners and that. But I explained to her that this Japan in 20 years is going to affect your granddaughter and possibly your own daughter very negatively, because in 20 years, if it is 10 or 20% foreign, and if that group of people is still coming in from the same areas, those people either have a grudge against Japan or they're people that want to use Japan in a certain way. And what she said was, I'll be dead. And
really, so these are people of a previous generation. I'm guessing must have been born in the 50s or 60s.
The answer was, I'll be dead, so it doesn't matter.
Really? Wow. So when they told me Shinto wasn't religious at all, that it was a social observance, I guess they weren't lying.
There are people, of course, there are going to be people that believe differently. And now she's also a woman. Her father and I have talked here and there. He's about this sort of thing. He's a little more stoic. He doesn't. He's a construction contractor, and he'll talk about things that really bother him. But in the end, at the same thing, he'll be like, but in the end, and this is what worries me. Japan is and has become extremely materialistic. He is a boomer, and if Shinto was the unifying religion a long time ago for the Japanese people, of course, Buddhism is probably bigger in Japan now, and maybe even Christianity is bigger as well. The Japanese in the boomer age, I'm not sure what they hang on to. It appears to be that it was like the economic miracle that was Japan. That's what formed their understanding of, that's what a modern Japanese should be. And when I said they don't have a Keith Woods here on TV, I'm kind of explaining that to the general group of people. There's no church. Whatever you think of church, there's no church. There's no good church. There's no bad church. Technically there are Christian churches, but I mean, there's no church that's also working against the TV and working against a sense of materialism.
Well, that's what I wanted to jump to as a side thing. When you were talking earlier, when you talked about television and its importance and how there's a national dialogue and it's carried, it sort of has as a kind of a backbone, the messaging that comes through on television. Do you get the sense that it's easy for just anyone to introduce points of discussion into that discourse through TV, or do you get the sense that there's, kind of like when you see footage of news programs in the US and you see them like they cut between 15 different programs and you find the same phrase repeated over and over again? Do you get the sense when looking at Japanese television that there is pretty much someone setting the tone? Do you get the sense that the subjects of national conversation that emerge in the press are things that spontaneously emerge out of the interests of different producers and TV programs, or does it seem like it's all cooked in one kitchen somewhere?
You know what? That's a question that unfortunately is going to go a little bit beyond me, and that is because I can read the newspapers, but I can read it and understand about 50%, and the 50% I don't understand is a 50% that probably carries nuances that would connect me to some sort of conclusion on that issue. And when it comes to TV, because we're watching TV a little bit less often, what I'm basically reacting to is when I meet people who are watching TV, when I watch the reactions of my daughter's grandparents, etc., and when I watch it, and kind of just connecting the thread through there. So I can't really talk about newspapers because, alas,
you don't have all the data. Right.
I don't. However, when people link to newspaper articles on, say, YouTube streams, etc., on Japanese YouTube streams that are done by foreigners, they'll link to things that are what you would typically get from sort of a progressive standpoint. And I think in general, if you're going to, Japan as a liberal country, which has a parliament, has it's a vassal state of the capitalist or the liberal European or American hegemony, right? So because of that, you have to keep the forward momentum within that. And that means that you can't really allow dissonant voices. And so TV, the furthest I've seen that's like had any sort of questions about things, it's been like conspiracy shows. And they would be like, oh, is the world flat? And, you know, philosophically, that's not a bad question to ask. I live on, like, you know, why not ask, is the world flat? But nothing that's questioning, like,
anything that matters.
Yeah, anything that matters to your people. And then, you know, you brought up Mishima, and I'm reading Mishima. I haven't finished even a single novel of his. I've just read about him. But you have someone suggested in the chat that Keith Woods, Mishima is Keith Woods, or the Japanese Keith Woods is Mishima. And maybe he is. I need to learn. I need to read up about him more. But maybe one of those people pops up every 20, 30 years, and that sort of person leaves their mark for a second and then is gone. And I've never read. When you meet a Japanese, one thing is nice, by the way, is you meet a Japanese person and you're not immediately talking about politics. If you talk about politics, it's because you went there. You went there. I've never met a Japanese, and I know hundreds of Japanese people, you know, some very well, some not very well. I've never met a single person that brings up politics. So you won't know what they think about this party or that party or immigration or that. Now, if you go there, then they'll talk about it. And they will talk about it from a very pure perspective. But because maybe they haven't talked about it with other people so much, what they will do is they will say things like, yeah, I have noticed that there are more foreigners around. That's interesting. Something like that. But they won't have you're muted.
Did they attach a value judgment to it? Are they, I mean, do you get any kind of sense that people are pissed off about the foreigners being there? Okay, so here's another point that's kind of interesting. And again, all of this is going to be rather relative in terms of basically, I'm a foreigner. I have these friends. I speak good Japanese, but not great Japanese. I haven't met everyone in the country. You know, the yada yada. Sure. But the type of person in Japan generally that I meet that is willing to talk up about their political or social beliefs generally has a lot of foreign friends. And my guess is they meet their foreign friends, and foreign friends like, damn, why is it that da-da-da-da-da doesn't happen in Japan? Why is the da-da-da-da? And they're suddenly like, whoa, wait a second. Yeah, why is that? And they're suddenly questioning their right. So it's really it's the sample that we're dealing with here. The group of people that you interact with is one that is necessarily going to be more open to interaction with foreigners.
Well, sure. That would absolutely, obviously, if a Japanese is interacting with me, they're already interacting with foreigners. And now, you know, if I go to like a farmer's market or something like that, that would be a regular Japanese, and they're very approachable. But like, you're never going to meet someone who's like, let's say this hat was red for some reason. Like, it's just red. Like, I'm never going to go into a shop and someone's going to look at my hat like, does that say?
Make Japan, make Japan great again.
Right. No one's going to do that. No one's ever going to do that. And what's nice is it's disarming, because you never feel a hostility, but at the same time, people don't think about these things. I remember back when I lived in another city just about south of here, I was tutoring a lady in English, and we were talking about how to get your ideas out. And I was like, why don't you write? Let's practice writing an essay. And she's like, I've never written an essay. And it's kind of this. I get the idea that sort of like expressing your idea is not a big thing in Japan. I don't know if that's from the Japan of before. I don't know if that's Japan of, you know, the modern Japan. I don't know about that. I didn't go through the Japanese school system, so I just have to look at this thing from the outside perspective. And I get the idea that Japanese are not used to bringing their opinions out. And so something that does bother them, maybe they keep inside. I don't know. Maybe they keep it within their family. Like they don't express it to their family. But when they meet someone, that thing doesn't come out unless another person brings it out. And if both people are Japanese, like whatever this modern or whatever, if it's an older cultural Japanese, they don't come together and be like, there's kind of this problem here. I've noticed there's a bit more trash down near the corner of Science Street and something, and there's always this guy that is definitely not Japanese around you. They'll never talk about that, and because of that, you don't have any sort of aired grievance between, as far as I can understand, you don't have this aired grievance generally between Japanese people.
It sounds to me that there's a considerable amount of going along to get along, not to make it sound too evil, but the idea of reducing social friction. Why go there if it's going to cause a problem? What I need to do is get my bills paid, because the square meter cost of real estate in Tokyo, it's just insane. That could be, or was once upon a time. Yeah, it was a joke when I was living in Turkey. I had a friend who was a carpet dealer, and the Japanese tourists would show up, and he'd call his one guy who's a Turk who spoke Japanese, and he's like, yeah, we'll sell some rugs. I'm like, really? They're into rugs? He's like, yeah, always the smallest ones. They buy these tiny ones because their apartments are tiny. So like, you have the special Turk who comes, who speaks Japanese and knows that he has to sell them very expensive but really tiny carpets. It's a specific thing, I guess, about the value of space in Japan. Well, you had wanted to did you want to say something? I seem to recall when we were going back and forth before we, when we were laying out what might be involved in the discussion, you said something about carpenters. Was that something you wanted to go into as an example, or to illustrate in some sense what's happening here in Japan? And I don't want to cut you off from giving any other examples of why you think Japan is not a good example, because remember, that's how we started. So the carpenter idea I'm interested in, and I'm also interested in any other ideas you might have for why you think Japan might not be as good an example of a nationalist, heaven.
Well, I think the basic point I would make, and maybe in this conversation I've not made the my point very well, and that's fine. Maybe I need to work in my essays as well. Is this: if you hold up as nationalists, if you hold Japan up as a good example of an ethno-state, you're basically holding up a liberal state that has a foreign constitution, that has, to its credit, still a large supermajority of its people who run the country. However, they're running it according to foreign. Wait, that's four fingers, by the way. They're running it according to foreign rules, from top to bottom. Everything is foreign. So what am I wearing? I'm wearing what a regular Japanese. Everyone around the world's wearing very similar clothes now, as you know. So like, if you were some person and be like, we're waiting for the one world government. You could also say, well, it already exists, because everyone's using the same forward momentum system in order to get unlimited potential from the economy, et cetera, and that's why everyone needs T-shirts that last for about a year, and they need a new one, and then you throw it away, and constantly like that. The point is, when you say Japan, what you're thinking of is a modernized, liberalized Japan that not only didn't exist 300 years ago, and maybe you're like, well, 300, that's a long time. Okay, it didn't exist right before World War II, 70 years ago. And so not only is it a bubble of what is this? It's a conquered nation. It's got a foreign constitution. It's got a foreign economic system. It now has basically and it does have a foreign central bank. It has the TV stations filter the news in a progressive way. What you're idolizing in Japan is essentially a country, a material construction that will, in 20 years, be exactly the thing that you are living in now and complaining about.
Well, let me come at it as there are many ways in which I tend to agree with you, that it's kind of a fantasy in terms of something. However, there's one solid reality, and if I play devil's advocate and come at it from the other direction, and I think a certain number of people, watching would probably come in and say, well, there's a point there. It's still overwhelmingly Japanese. What is it, 90 what?
97.
I mean, just think about that. Like, I imagine that a certain number of people would come in and just say, who cares about the rest? Because at least the genetic picture. Now, I'm not one of those people necessarily. No, right. Again, I'm giving you the devil's advocate viewpoint. They'd say, there's still a genetic trajectory of these people, and their ideas can come and go, but they'll remain the same people on on their islands to a certain extent. Now, that granted, what you said earlier about the what we looked at with the diagram on the foreign workers, you know, and how many of them are coming in, and how there is a clear trajectory, and how the adoption of these progressive attitudes, there's a clear trajectory. There's a clear trajectory not only with the number of people who are coming to stay, but the length of the visas that they're given to stay. I mean, these are hard facts. Nevertheless, 97%. I mean, even if you want to bitch about the hairy Ainu in the north, you know, I mean, they're still pretty solidly Japanese. So I mean, that does argue in the other direction. So yeah, there's also please respond with whatever you like. I realize in addition to the carpentry, there's also the national anthem too that I have queued up if you want to do that. So please, sir, it's on you. What do we need to know next?
Well, I guess I would say this: 97% does sound amazing, but what if 20 years ago it was more like 95.5%, or 99.5%? And so you're cheering on yahoo, yahoo, but you've lost 2.5% in just 20 years. And what if that trajectory is going so fast that in another 10 years it'll be maybe 10% of your population will be foreign? So I understand if you target just the 97%, be like, okay, we can stop it there. That's it. Then absolutely, Japan is a great place to sort of at least target from just a single what is the word? A single don't talk a lot in my normal life. What is the word? A single data point. From a single data point, absolutely. Absolutely, 97% is basically like heaven. And when my parents left Sweden was around 95% Swedish.
No, there's a strong argument right there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. And Sweden was nowhere near as progressive as Japan is now. Japan is the first country in the world to add sexual liberation and all that into its constitution. It is from the ground, the Japanese state, the modern Japanese liberal state is completely subverted. And I think when things happen in Japan, they happen fast. So the 97%, I understand that is amazing. And I mean, even back when I was a kid in Sweden, I remember say like 90%, I don't know what it was back then, 90, it was very close to 95, 90, something like that. It was a different Sweden. When I went back in 2011, it was like, what happened? Where's the Swedish, like the clean, like whatever. And Japan is, in the 20 years from the first time I came till now, has basically had its foreign population more than double. It's basically tripled. And the rate of increase from 2012 is basically gone up. The number has gone up 200%. And the rate of increase has gone up faster than that.
All right. So the trajectory is obvious.
Right.
It has one, and it's not going to a good place.
Right.
But now coming from the other direction, though, do you think, given that I saw definitely a collective spirit, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
And if there's a thing about like picking things up together to carry things together. I used to see it when they had to carry drums, right? And we had a certain number of us foreign people who were playing taiko, right? But you had to be very careful with the drums. They're cut from a single piece of wood, concentrically, smaller and smaller drums. Japanese carpentry is treated almost religiously because wood is so damn valuable. You know, you pick those drums up, you're supposed to treat them ritually. They're very important, you know, not that it's a serious ritual, but it's like Shinto, not that they're thinking of it as truly being religious.
Yeah, right.
Trying to read that. Yes, strange hat, stylish. And so I saw that there are certain ways that they chant together as they pick something up to carry something heavy. You know, there's just a way that they work together. It's the same way that they go, "Aya," you know, at the same time. So given that that's the case, and that they generally want to go along to get along, and given what you said earlier, where you were talking about how it's hard to be a quote unquote racist when you're in a overwhelmingly homogeneous country, what happens when they start to notice? I mean, shouldn't we at least assume that there's some possibility that a reaction could occur once it gets to a point where it's more clear that people would be more likely to notice what's going on around them? I mean, I can't imagine like a Black Lives Matter thing going on where you've got a bunch of Japanese people sitting around and people run up to the tables and ruin their dinners and like sit down and start eating their food. And I mean, Japanese aren't going to put up with it. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to run into the streets with pitchforks and torches, but their sense of propriety seems to be pretty hardcore. And violations of the social norms we just like we talked about earlier, seem to be the very things that for them justify the idea of not even having a foreigner in here. It's not that you necessarily object to the fact that they smell like hairy barbarians who eat cheese. It's specifically that they're going to flub all these things. And so I tend to think that maybe it won't be truly Japanese culture, historically, traditionally Japanese culture that they're defending, but it will be something that they will be defending, and it will be happening because collectively they'll be affronted that those values have been disregarded. What do you make of that?
By the way, you were looking at this George Floyd with a corona on his.
It did look
maybe
like
not the best design.
Trumpety horns. Yes.
Maybe not the best design. It was immediately. I put it up on my spreadsheet and it's gone. They took it down.
Yeah,
maybe it's just a bad design. Whatever.
I wonder why. Yeah, it would have to be larger in order to
I couldn't get any bigger than that.
Space on the hat. Yeah, because it's like you need to fill the real estate, otherwise it's unrecognizable.
Yeah, it just looks like a blob. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to try to switch nice and smooth, but it didn't work. You know what? I think when I talk with the regular Japanese, and they're eventually open to the fact that maybe immigration isn't a good idea, but just like every democracy, it doesn't matter what you vote, what you think. There's no one on your side. So the Conservative Party, Abe's party, the guy that just had irritable bowel syndrome and got out, he was the quote unquote far right nationalist party. In fact, the people on the other side call him Hitler, and they show him with a little mustache like that on a lot of their sort of anti-Abe propaganda. And this guy is the guy that increased immigration faster and harder than any other prime minister, and whose party did the same thing in such a short time.
But he did oversee a return to a more bellicose stance on the part of the so-called defense forces, right? Hasn't he invested in helicopter carriers? And as I recall, the Japanese have some excellent submarines. Like they have top drawer, high class submarines.
Oh, by the way, the Winter's like it looks. Looks like a black beholder. This does look like a black beholder. It's true. Dungeons & Dragons.
Wow, beholder out of the original Monsters manual. Yeah, with the little eyes on its stalks. Yes, I'm not just a D&D fan. I was a dungeon master. Not just a player. I was a dungeon master.
I designed a game by myself that didn't require dice, but it wasn't as good. Of course, it wasn't.
It's got to have dice. You got to carry your dice in the pouch, man. You got to have a dice pouch.
No, man.
Actually, come on, man. You got to have a dice pouch.
No, it's true. Yeah. You know what? You can add battleships, you can add tanks, you can add all that, but when it comes down to it, and I think you set the stage for this, or you brought this up earlier, and Shinto is something you do. Shinto is the religion you go to pray at New Year's, or you go to pray in August, or you go to pray in May, when everyone goes back home to visit their grandparents, and then to have like a week off, and they go and visit their graves. That's it. Because there is no spiritual as far as I can tell, it doesn't appear that there's a spiritual non-materialistic core to Japan. Because of that, you can add all the tanks you want, but those tanks are going to come in with more immigration. And who's eventually going to pilot tanks? They're going to be it's a liberal country. It's eventually going to be, your army's going to be a mixed army. Your Japanese people, your non-Japanese people, because the Japanese people that are the non-Japanese, that are I will call it skyrocketing. You may not, in the population.
Relative to the previous period of time, yes. I imagine you could call it skyrocketing.
Yes. Because that population is skyrocketing within historical norms, and that's population who, yes, there are a lot of foreign workers who are here just very on a short-term basis, but they're recognized by people that don't care for Japan to have a hegemony over its own culture. I'm not going to bring up the people because it probably may not be a good idea, but those people will represent the foreigners in Japan legally as well as on the media, which they have a lot of control in, and they have a lot of representativism. In fact, you could look at the number of foreigners that are writing papers here, newspaper articles here in Japan, and they're very interesting people. But they're always, almost to a one, very anti-Japanese, depending on how you look at it. What I mean is, if they can on the outside be like, we love Japan, we love how clean, we love how the GDP is, but they will never support something that's traditionally Japanese. Never. I've never met a foreigner that's on the, and even the ones that say they love Japan, they just love the samurai and they love the anime stuff like that. And they want to be the weird foreigner that wears like the construction thong. It's like you put your foot in it and it's got the big toe. About it's got the big toe.
Oh, like Tabi shoes or whatever. Tabi socks.
Tabi shoes for construction.
But you're not going to see them running around in a fundoshi, you know.
I hope not. Yeah. But yeah, it's either you're going to be some sort of eclectic, magnetic foreigner who's weird into the Japanese thing, or you're going to be some sort of progressive. Japan, because I don't think I'm wrong here. There is not a spiritual core. There is the sort of aping of spiritual past. There is, you recognize that in the past there was a devotion to, say, either the animistic or the paganistic gods of Shinto. And because of that, you still pray at shrine 3 times a year. And maybe in your house, if someone's died, you have this little thing called a daibutsu, but that's for Buddhism. And you like ring it and you light some incense. But that's it. I mean, I've had so many conversations with Japanese. I don't get this philosophical understand. How do I say this? Okay, I'm not going to get on this topic. The first time anyone brought up the juice question was a Japanese to me, and that got me thinking. But no one talks about philosophy, about what it means to be Japanese. I've never had this. I've never heard this. I've never seen it on TV. When people talk about it, it's always about GDP and all that.
But they don't have festivals. They don't wear happy coats. They don't have mochi poundings. They don't have cherry blossom festivals. They don't get drunk on sake. They don't.
Yes, all of that.
I mean, those are legitimately Japanese cultural practices. They're not imported from the West, right?
That's right. But basically participating in something like that, because you know what, there might be an interesting thing. Maybe there is something there when a person participates in an ancient tradition in the modern world. Maybe they feel something there. Maybe there's a connection to some spirit that they don't think about normally. But that spirit doesn't go out from there. You have a tradition, and then you have the normal materialistic life. And again, the normal materialistic life exists for GDP. You take that person out of there, they can, if they're not working to increase the stock power or whatever of their company, they can't farm, they can't fish, they don't understand, they don't have an oral understanding of their ancestors, they don't have an understanding of we the peasants versus the daimyo. They don't have, the rice does not support the Japanese. The Japanese and the rice are completely disconnected, essentially. You've got corporations covering it, and you've got small farmers, and that's it. The regular Japanese is basically an Asian, Japanese Asian in jeans.
Salaryman.
Yeah, salaryman, and that's it. And why maybe listen, I'm not a philosopher, however you say it. I'm not a big religionist. I don't know where I stand on all this sort of things, but I do know that there's the core that exists that allows a people to go forward. No one's going to be like on their deathbed, oh, I wish I increased the stock of my company another 400%. That would have been. No, you want to be surrounded by your family. And what's happening in Japan? Lowest birth rate, as far as I understand, or one of the lowest birth rates. Of course, everyone knows this among the Western nations. Lowest sex rate between partners. The people are living in smaller houses than they used to be. They used to live with their, we always make fun of like people that live with their parents at 30 or 40. Well, Japanese, and my ancestors as well, they used to live multi-generationally in either housing complexes or large houses. In Japan, that was the norm until just about 70 or 80 years ago. And now people live in these tiny little houses that you could fit in your atrium in an American house. And they live away from their grandparents. The mom also works. Now, the good thing, and I think this is nice, the mom often works some sort of part-time job, and the dad is the major breadwinner. So it's not usually about the mom's career. However, the big career push with women is also a big thing. But there's no religious spiritual core, and because there's no working on the land between everyone, there's no physical. You don't have the physical understanding of the spirit of the land. You don't understand and feel the seasons change. The ground is not hard because you're on your car. It's always the same hardness, summer, winter, whatever. You're in the train, same thing. You're not.
But these are conditions that everyone faces across the world, are they not?
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying that Japan, you shouldn't. Apart from the 97%, I don't think there's any reason to idolize it as a nationalist, because you're idolizing a country that is exactly like yours in terms of it's just basically sipped the entire liberal juice. It's the same capitalist system. There's no spirit there. There's nothing that can move you forward as a people.
Right, and I would tend to agree. I mean, I tried to play devil's advocate earlier. I saw somebody brought it up in the chat that it's not enough if you don't have your culture.
Right.
That the bloodline, is important. Culture is important too. And I certainly, that was the big thing that I hesitated with Japan about in the first place, is because I had seen some of those things myself. However, I will say this: Japan is becoming increasingly important for containment of China, and they had forsworn all offensive war. They were only going to have self-defense forces. Now the shift under, I guess it was under Abe, wasn't it, or him and the person right before him, maybe. The shift to the self-defense forces having more than just ships that come and help with like medical and logistics, right? Actually having weapons and the rest. That's a big change. And while it has suited any number of players, the Americans initially wanted to pacify Japan, it seems to me. Certainly they didn't want to have further problems there, but they also wanted to get them on their feet. Because at the same time as we were rebuilding Japan, we were doing everything that we could to make sure that the communists won in China. And I guess somebody back along the chain of command decided that we better, get Japan set up there eventually. So that something can be done to contain China. But to me, I mentioned it to my friend Tim that I talk to often, it looks like we have the development of a number of different models. There is the model that we took for rebuilding the Philippines, which was an American possession.
Right.
Very sloppy, very messy. I mean, but to be fair, the Philippines are thousands and thousands and thousands of islands across a vast territory.
Right.
So with Philippines is one system in East Asia that we set up as a test to see how westernized it could become, and we were doing that on the foundations laid by the Spanish. Second, we've got Formosa, Taiwan, right, which is an experiment we've done for setting up some sort of Western-ish system in East Asia. We've got South Korea, which is another variant with its own features, another system we've put together. And then we've got Japan. And so we have four. There are four fingers here that represent different ways in which we've come at this and attempted to shape the East as an experiment. And to be honest with you, I would argue that what has happened in China is in large part an experiment of ours or of the West and other parties, simply because they developed that communism under pressure from the West as well. Though Anteos, who I spoke with, had pointed out that early in the Chinese court, there was some guy who natively was trying to bring in communism very early. So I don't want to get way out over my skis because this isn't my area of knowledge. What I want to underscore is that the West has set up these different little petri dishes to see what could be done to recreate these cultures in various ways. And now we have four of them that we've experimented with, if not five. And with things changing in China and China becoming more bellicose, it may be that we've gotten to a point where it's time for Japan to come online a little bit again. And what causes me to hesitate to, I mean, you're right. I'm not arguing with any of these central points you've made about the culture and the rest, or the fact that it's accelerated in terms of the population beginning to be, let's not say replaced, but it's starting to look like that, right? It's in the early
I
stages.
think that's a good word.
Well, yes. Anyway, you talked about, despite all these things going on, you talked about how there's generally a central message coming out of the media, and that it's hard for other people to get in on it, that the topics of conversation nationally are set by the media. If everything else begins to change, like if Trump, I don't want to get too far off into this, but if Trump gets reelected, I think the first thing that you're going to see is that suddenly Boris Johnson is going to grow as much of a backbone as he needs to in order to make it look like the UK is really going to pull from the EU and go the way of the Anglosphere. I think you're immediately going to see Australia stiffen up. It's going to take a little bit longer for New Zealand and Canada. But once you have the old British Empire elements on their feet and pushing back, if Trump gets his other 4 years, China, there's going to be moves to contain them. And part of the project of doing that, it's going to create the surrounding environment, the mood of these Western countries that indirectly, as though it's some remove, shapes events in Japan. That whole background tone that they would need to harmonize with to be with it will have shifted, and it particularly shifted in a way where Japan is required to be more aggressive and bellicose. And given their collectivism, their ability to imitate, I'm not saying that there aren't individually talented Japanese people, but I studied flamenco also, and I saw these dancers come over and learn Spanish flamenco dancing, and they're Japanese. And I wouldn't say that they're creating their own best choreographies, but I've learned how hard it is just to dance well and correctly, and they pick it up. So I think that if the message came down from upon high, I'm sorry, it's taken me a while to get this out. The message came down from upon high, and the parameters of the surrounding countries and the mood of these other nations, the zeitgeist or whatever, had shifted. I don't think it would really take all that much. It would take 1 to 2 generations to suddenly have a new type of more bellicose and nationalistic Japanese that just what do you call the hakama pants? What are the big
I think it's those big ones that blouse out at the bottom.
Yeah, and the what is it? A sarashi is what you wrap around the waist. It's super tight, and they like almost squeeze you. I used to have to put the costumes on, right?
Why do you know? Are you in TV or something like that? I should know this.
TV. No, I studied taiko, and so these different outfits and things, we had to wear them on stage, and I used to know the names of them. Stage?
Okay, so you were filmed.
No, I played taiko drums. Boom, 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 boom.
I know that.
Ichi Sachi.
But it sounds like you had some you were in Japan for like work or something like that. Am I right?
Oh yeah, it was field research. It was market research for pharmaceutical companies. I was helping them figure out new brands, and so we had to interview lots of people. And I talked to individual Japanese too. So I told you the translator was really impressive. I saw other doctors come in who were very much like you're talking about. They were kind of like, I do what I do, and that's what everyone does, and I say what I say, and I hope I don't sound too out of They're very polite, but very straightforward, disinterested in being controversial. But there was one guy who came in, and he really struck me. I got the sense, okay, there are a few of those much more individualistic Japanese people who are skeptical and the rest. There were a few that I saw that were like that weren't just kind of going along with the rest of the people. Anyway, my point is that if the environment changes, I think you could see a shift with the Japanese. Please feel free to respond. Tell me that I'm full of shit, or if you disagree. And I do want to make sure that before we finish, you have a chance to present whatever you wanted to do with the national anthem, and or carpentry if you wanted to cover those things.
No, okay. I mean, my my basic message about the 97% now, and about idolizing Japan. How I would sort of respond to your talk about the English Empire, etc., the former English Empire and the colonies, etc., and maybe there being a new narrative that would maybe sort of slide in if that empire sort of flexes muscles again in an English way. I would ask, is it possible for England to flex its muscles and even the colonies altogether in an English way or even in an American way at this point?
With the United States together. Yeah.
Well, what I mean is, sure, the states exist, and I don't mean the United States. I mean those states exist, but at this point, is America I'm sorry, is America American in the same way it was American before World War One? Do we have pioneers still in America? In Canada, what we have is, I came there when I was 15, right? So I say that tentatively, but in Canada, there's this thing that's called the settler complex, and that we don't have the pioneers in the same way, that the government and the settlers kind of work together. So it wasn't sort of like claim your land, but there's what's called the settler stock, and those are the Canadians that can trace their lineage back to possibly before the split with America, before the 1812. I'm probably screwing this up. Wars before that, the people that settled the land, and that type of person. If you read, even if you just read some, even like Robertson Davies, who's a famous author of Fifth Business, famous Canadian author. You probably haven't heard about it in the States. If you read what Canadians thought about 100 years ago, and what they thought about what was a Canadian, and what they thought about the future of Canada, and what they thought its role in the world was, etc. And Canada was part, or is part, I suppose, of the English. What is it called? The group. What's it called?
Anglosphere, sure. Yeah, the Commonwealth.
Commonwealth. Thank you. Part of the Commonwealth. That sort of person, that sort of thinking no longer exists. So what exists now? Maybe there can be sort of more bellicose actions from Trump. Maybe Johnson can take off his big brimmed black hat and put on, just like brush his blonde hair out a bit, and maybe act like an Englishman. But I don't think that's going to happen from any of the big political parties. I don't think we're going to get sort of a nationalism in terms of reaching deep into the English blood or the English Commonwealth. I don't think we're going to get that. And even if we did, what would be the reaction from Japan? A liberal Japan, a liberal state that is an American vassal, fine, for good or bad, American vassal with a strong GDP. What are they going to do that's Japanese? And maybe
you can't step twice into the same river. So
right.
I mean, it's an old statement by Heraclitus, right?
You can't go back.
The U.S. isn't going to recover what it once was. It might be able to recover something in some new form. Where's it
going to grab that stuff from, though? I guess is what I'm like. It has to come. The ideas, as we always talk about, exist. Ideas don't exist by themselves. They have to come from somewhere. Where they come from people, and that's why nationalists, or that's why we care about the people. But if you have 65% of America being non-white, and England is 70, I think, %, and you have stronger and stronger representation from, in fact, the amount of representation and support from the big companies and all that for all those other people who are not English, etc., is growing all the time. How is it politics? Even if it's bellicose against China, how is it going to be bellicose in an English way?
Well, first off, when I brought up the stuff with the Anglosphere, I wasn't going specifically after English. It was the idea that the United States working together with the U.S. and British navies together can begin to put pressure on the EU to behave in a certain way. We've got them locked in between the Soviet or Russia, Soviet Union, Russia and Britain are at either end, along with the U.S. And the EU is going to get shifted in certain respects. It's already beginning to happen as the UK peels off with Brexit. It's going to get stronger trade deals with its former relationships. They're far flung. They're imperial. As best I recall, the UK is now working on an aircraft carrier again. After having not had them for quite some time.
Are they making themselves, or they're using some sort of private firm that's owned by who knows what?
I don't know about the details of that, but I will guarantee you this: as far as the UK has fallen, as far as the US has fallen, both countries still make damn good ships. But the point that I'm getting at is that you're going to have Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, the UK. Let's leave South Africa out for the time being. And then when you start talking about allies of the US, so you start talking about South Korea and Japan. Brazil seems to be on board with a lot of this. We've got a few Eastern European countries that are peeling off from the current mess. I would not be so quick as to assume that nothing could come of this. Now, it'll be something different than was in the past. And I'll also add that I'm not trying to. Facile Goose mentions India is another one that, at least for the time being, is coming along. I think there's some problems with U.S. interest versus Indian interest in the long run, but for the time being, as a balance against China, they work great. And as the stage gets set in a different way, people's attitudes will change. Again, I'm not trying to convince you that it will turn out great. Who knows what will happen? But I think it's at least worth imagining that things can change. It's like the line from Hamlet. There are things undreamt of. There are things in heaven and earth undreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. There's that for people who espouse nationalism, who are always talking about, like Jason from No White Guilt likes to hammer on the concept of or the idea of biospirit. To assert those things and then say, well, no, there's no way that anything of the people themselves could manifest ever again. I mean, it's kind of like, well, which side do you want to take?
That's
and so, but all that is not to say that you don't have a point. And I grant it. I mean, first off, who cares what I think, because I don't live in Japan. I'm not looking at it myself. But everything that you're saying to me seems to fit. It seems, I could see where they're going to see an exponential increase in the displacement of migrant working populations that'll eventually become something else. We are seeing the extension of the visas, the larger numbers of the workers, the pushing of more and more, tyrannical, programs of liberalism, love the rainbow flags or else, that kind of thing is spreading everywhere. But let's see what happens with these current shifts in geopolitics, and let's see if it takes us anywhere else. Now, I want to take a chance to have some people ask questions. We're not doing super chats because at this point, I don't feel like charging people to ask questions. Perhaps I'll get smart and in future do that. Do you are you okay? We're kind of getting a little bit short on time.
Obviously, it's time to wind down. I'm not going to do any more. I'm not going to do any more like philosophizing or whatever.
You do whatever you want, man.
I did bring two props. Where's the camera? There it is. Two props. And it is related to just carpentry. I just want to explain something. One thing that is, I have two white pills to this whole thing. I'm generally probably not a very optimistic person, but two white pills, I think in general that's probably pretty fair. But two white pills are this. I used to work in construction back when I was 21, 2019. And, you put up your walls, you just you drill it, you drive it, you put up some, maybe you put some aluminium joists in there, maybe you put some big pieces of wood in there. It's all put together by nails and wood, and that's in Canada. Now, of course, that is a complete subversion of ancient, like even ancient by Canadian standards, like 200 years ago, people were using joinery. Why do they use joinery? Because joinery lasts forever. In Japan, one thing that is certainly a white pill, and because it's a structural thing, it's a bigger white pill than it could be if it was just like, something in the economic sense or something like that. And that is that Japanese still do use a lot of joinery in their buildings. I've gone to a bunch of different construction sites, on the outside at least, and I've also watched how they put things up. Now, there's a house that's going up right next to me, and this is kind of a black pill again. It's all prefabbed, and they just basically nail gun things up. And it was like, oh man, that's worse than Japan. But at the same time, houses around there, even if it's prefabbed, the way they'll prefab it is so they'll have a piece of wood here that then has, where is the bloody camera? Well, whatever. There's a camera, whatever. There's a piece of wood that has a hole in it. And what do? You put the piece of wood that has then some sort of, what's the word?
A peg? You hammer the pegs into the holes?
I'm thinking of a tenon. It's got a tenon. You put the tenon into the mortise, and then you stop it with some sort of peg like that. Or even more clever, they cut out. There's the Japanese joinery is.
It's fantastic. I saw
it's incredible stuff. It's incredible stuff.
I had to go to workshops in San Francisco and of course, San Francisco has a huge Japan town. And that was with my taiko teacher. They decided they were going to show us how to make some of their lesser quality drums, the ones that didn't come from Japan.
Right.
And he had a buddy who ran a carpentry shop, and I've never seen, so many goddamn clamps, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of clamps of all sizes on the walls, like all the equipment. Like, these guys take their shit seriously. And for my hand tools that I sharpen, mainly knives because I'm not much of a macho work guy. But when I do have to sharpen things, I use King Waterstones. Japanese Waterstones are the best, and
they're pretty good.
Great Japanese steel tools. I'm not saying King's the best brand, but Japanese Waterstones work great. They're really high quality. So yeah, I've seen it. They're hardcore about their carpentry.
Yeah. So I would just the reason why I highlight this is because a lot of the men they're still men, and I don't think this goes without saying for any construction site. There's a lot of men that want to get their money, etc. But in Japan, I mean, these guys are working out. Not working out, but like they're working outside when it's Japan muggy 38 degrees outside, and they're putting up pretty complex buildings, even if it's just a house. And a lot of the houses are still using traditional joinery methods. And why is that? I guess it's, to be strong against earthquakes, which we have every week, big or small, you have big earthquakes every week. It also could be, and that could be something that's still around to support a traditional Japanese method that came from their ancestors. A lot of the temples and castles are rebuilt every 50 years, and whether or not they burn down. And the reason they do that is to keep them both safe and clean, but also it keeps the traditions alive. And they do it exactly the way, or as close to in the same way in which they were originally made. So the same joinery, the same tools, oftentimes. So the people that also will be then building it will use maybe not the same clothes, but they'll basically be building that old castle that you see or that old temple the same way that their ancestors did. And because of that, you're not going to have something like Notre Dame where the roof burns and like, what do we do? We can't build it anymore. Japan, so this is a great white pill for me. I'm just going to show you this thing. It looks like a snowflake. It's called a kumiko. And this thing is all held together just by joinery. Let's see if I could pull a part off.
Let me see if I can get you far larger on the screen. Hang on. Let me see if...
That's what she said.
Nope, that's the wrong one. Stop now. Let me see. God, they don't give me the option. I guess I just need to get the... Is that not you? No?
I'm here. I'm the guy with the
No, I'm seeing if one of these things will allow me to get you larger on screen. And unfortunately, without... sorry.
That's all right. I'll just hold this up to wherever the camera... All right, so if you can see, basically you have channels dug out. And these are, by the way, cut by hand. These are cut by hand, but they're so precise that you take your... You know what? It's funny. I do carpentry, but I don't know any of the terms. Just pop it in there like yay. All these pieces are cut by hand with just basic Japanese saws, as well as what are they called? A kana? Kana, what's a kana? Some of you guys know because you said dao. Dao was the word, not pigs. Kana is a hand plane. And so this other piece, hand cut, that's actually a single piece of wood cut in half. It's supported here like that, and you put it together, and then it becomes a triangle bit here. And then that goes in the middle, and you guys are like, what is he showing me? Well, what I'm showing you is the basic Japanese buildings are still built like this. They will glue or they will nail things together after the joinery is done, but it's the traditional method of making things is still part of the culture. And because of that, there's a certain amount of the ancestor that can still go forward. And a Japanese plane, by the way, here we have Japanese plane. You guys have seen it. If you can say Dell, you've seen a Japanese plane. But I haven't actually set this thing up yet, so it's just basically brand new. This is a 70 millimeter Japanese plane here. You pull, you hold it, you put your hands. Where's the camera, man? It's like, all right, you pull it. A Western plane, you push. And they're a little bit more complicated, and often they're made of metal. The Japanese one, it's just basically a piece of very heavy wood, which is cut out here, and you have a block here that holds the blade in place, and they're of course just iron blades. So they rust if you don't take care of them. You got to oil them, and you got to set it up by digging out some channels here, and then you've got to flatten it. But they are an ancient piece of technology that is still being used today and is really powerful and extremely good. You can get with a big hand plane, you can basically make almost a perfect if you've got the skills. I'm not quite that good for making tables that are perfectly flat just with a hand plane. rather than just a machine. And because Japanese carpenters still use this, there is a connection that is in the hand with the past. And I think this is very important. It's not, and you're using this thing from the past that existed before the current order, before your grandparents existed, before all the politicians you can name, before, back when Japan used to not even be in the same, didn't even used to be an empire in the same way. So that's really cool. The other thing is, with, not sure what's going down downstairs. No, we want to know. But the other thing on that I would sort of bring up is the Western plane you push, the Japanese plane you pull. And what that means is you can go on a longer plane without having to sort of reorient yourself. With a push, you only have maybe about a meter and a half before, and probably not even that, before you're going to start to sort of shift the plane a bit. With the Japanese,
yeah, and I find with pulling, I tend to have more control too, because it's like trying to push an object rather than pulling it. You tend to have, I'm not saying this well, but I tend to think that you have more control over the force and less risk of it suddenly popping and sliding out of control. Right. That said, a lot of the tools that people are using on the construction site are all coming from abroad. And if you go, this is going to tie into, if you go to a place where there's a lot of a lot of old Japanese buildings that you consider, when you think of Japan in a more traditional sense, you're going to see a lot of people that you might think are Japanese. Well, they're wearing kimono and all that. No, they're not. They're foreigners that are coming in to wear traditional Japanese clothes, paying money, doing the capitalist thing, paying money to wear a Japanese thing, to walk on Japanese streets in a traditional way. And the Japanese people there are wearing their foreign crappy jeans that are going to last 2 years, their crappy t-shirts like what I'm wearing. And you're looking at people who don't even know how to walk in the Japanese clogs, who are now, to the uninitiated foreign eye, are going to see those things. They're like, oh, those are Japanese people. They're not. They're not. Well, you know the difference when you see it. I mean, there's that famous little bit, and I can attest to it because it's not just in the movie. It was a film that was big. It was really popular at some point, I think in the 90s. It was called Baraka, shot in 70 millimeter or whatever. And there's this scene of this monk of some kind in Japan walking down the street very precisely. The whole thing of the foot comes up, steps forward, ball of the foot touches, ball of the foot adjusts, fully the foot comes down, next foot gets lifted. The super meditative, precise, each motion must be just so. There's a considerable amount of that too. Like, I mean, there are so many things that seem to me to be Japanese that are, and I'm not a big worshiper of the Japanese. I mean, I dug the culture to some extent when I was younger. I recognized lots of problems with it, but I admire them as a genuine, independent culture of their own. And the attention to sharpening steel and wanting tools that are really finely made and are well kept, like ones they're not worried about making it stainless steel. They'll leave it as something that you have to oil because that's part of the tradition with it, right? The idea of this joinery.
That's sharper that way too,
and less brittle, I would imagine as well. Depending on what type of steel you're using. But another one is the way that they move. And I already talked about some, they do move more carefully. They do not generally, unless they're making a show of being drunk, or you've got a character in a movie who's supposed to be oafish, and some Japanese person will be like, "Bakayaro," but unless it's like Toshiro Mifune pretending to be a drunk peasant, they generally are careful. They move more. They're more balanced in their movement. They're not suddenly and jerky. They literally move differently, and you can see a Western against their background because they move a different way. And things like how they fold. Like I talked at the opening, I'm like, what the fuck? Like,
where do you start?
Yeah, like what? Like, because I buy some things, like I think it's Hakama pants, I want to say. But for some reason, my mind is saying that's wrong. It's the damn pants, though, with the sides that are slightly open, that tie in the front, that flare out at the bottom, and they have all the.
That's right.
And I ordered some of those indigo dyed from Japan to use for one of my taiko costumes, and like I unfolded those things when I bought them because I had to put them in vinegar to fix a mordant to fix the dye because indigo can run. And I realized after that I'd never be able to fold them again. Ever. Like I'll never be able to figure it out. So the point is that there are a lot of minor ways that there are encouraging signs that some sense of a people's identity persists, despite the fact that I do not disagree with you about all the other background background stuff, these changes that have come.
Right.
But did I cut you off? Were there more you wanted to show with your props?
No, I don't. It's like 4 a.m. for you. I don't want to. If there's any questions, yeah, let's go there.
Yeah, let's take a look.
Yeah.
Let's take a look and see. I mean, I normally stay up late.
I can tell. Why are we starting this at 2 a.m.?
Well, I was trying to figure out what would work for your time frame. So
You're very Japanese. You're very Japanese.
I don't know. You have your birthday coming up, and the sounds downstairs was probably your cannibal wife dismembering some pedestrian to feed to you for your birthday. Okay, let me see how far back this goes. I'm probably going to have to look in the chat, which I hate, which is see how far. Yeah, it doesn't go back that far. The problem with the pop-out chat and all of the chats actually is they don't go all the way back to the beginning once you get to a certain distance. So, okay, if you guys have questions, we can take them for 5 or 10 minutes here. Is that okay with you, Nathan? Do you have time?
Yeah, no problem.
Call it another 10 minutes. We'll run this for 2 hours and 10 minutes. If you guys have questions, slap an @Semiagog on the beginning of it so I see it, and we'll see if we can get FAUXTAKU Lounge, Nathan, to...
I forgot to send a link to my people, my smaller group. Probably no one's here. I talk about cameras. Bloody hell.
Well, it'll still be here later. Yeah, if you guys want to check out his camera and lens channel,
I was wondering if I was
has
hoping
a way
there
of
was some
holding the lenses. He'll like hold the lenses up, and you'll hear him listen, and they'll go click, click, click. Talk about it. He gets way into his hardware. But then again, your camera image seems a whole hell of a lot better than mine.
This is just a MacBook.
Well, and probably newer. Okay, so we have a first question here. Again, people, if you want me to see it, put the @Semiagog in there. And Amanda Anderson is in the background making fun of me. Villain says, how cringe is Weibo to the Japanese? I do not know what that is.
Okay, I don't know exactly what Weibo is, but I think Weibo is, I think it's like those anime people, those guys that are like really into anime. I could be wrong, not just otaku, but they're like, they get like waifus. I don't know. There's a lot of Japanese that would probably be happy to talk about that. Like I live across the street from a guy who's not a weeaboo. He's a Japanese guy, but he's very much into that sort of anime culture. Now, I could be wrong. I don't know what weeaboo is, so I'm probably...
Well, then that's probably safest to be like...
this question, man.
Yeah, villain. What are you doing here, man? You trying to make my guests look bad? All right, well then, let's see here. Cy Sharp, hello, sir, is asking... I guess I should say sir or madam, since I don't really know. But somebody I've seen dropping in on the channel for a long time now asks, what's with the keyhole moat tombs in Japan?
Damn, you guys are just putting me on. I don't know what the...
Yeah, you weren't even ready, man.
Where's this question?
It says
keyhole moat tombs.
What's with the keyhole moat tombs? It must be a tomb that's shaped like a keyhole surrounded by a moat, or a tomb surrounded by a moat with an opening shaped like a keyhole. Yeah, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen. FAUXTAKU Lounge is not...
Yeah, know what he's talking about.
But we did get an explanation. Weebs or weebos are Westerners who are obsessed with things Japanese.
Oh yeah, it's generally pretty negative. Thank you very much for at least explaining what that is. It's generally pretty negative. It depends if it's like one of those weebs who come in. I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's kind of negative. There's a lot of like really ugly, especially guys who come in who are like, there's a lot of really ugly guys who they kind of like glom onto this whole what they think of is going to be possibly a more feminized or a weaker sort of male Japanese culture, and they come in and they're like these fat neckbeard guys, and they get into the weeboo stuff. That's what I know about it. I'm not like a terrible...
So the Japanese attitude towards it is
not generally positive. And I've listened. I've never heard guys talking about it, but I've heard some girls talking about it, and they were like kind of laughing, like it's just weird. So that's my input.
Okay, well, we have another one here. This is from Stop White Genocide. It says, ask him if the Japanese are a reliable deterrent to Chinese expansion.
You know what? I bet you anything that Semiagog would know. He seems to be way more like if you And we do. We got to admit it. We all listen to his podcast. He seems to be talking about this stuff a lot more. I'm like the real discount, like super discounted, doesn't have half the vocabulary, likes to touch wood more than he does philosophy, discounted version of like possibly an unintelligent version copy of all the cool guys like Keith Woods and Morgan. I'm not. I would say that Japan have, if they want to stop China, like what are they going to do? You know. But however, if you live in a society, and everyone's connected, then as we connect, you know, then maybe Japan can offer something to the Anglosphere.
We shall see. Okay, well, I think I have another question here. Yeah, this is from Winter saying, have you ever been to Akita? And is there anything different or unusual about it compared to the rest of Japan?
Well, once you get out of
Akita's
a bit up north. The whole northern part of Japan is one thing. Okay, here's kind of interesting thing. Here in Tokyo, people say there are four seasons. So that would be winter, summer, spring, summer, fall. But it turns out there's no snow. So there's just like fall, and then spring is very short, and it gets summer very quickly. And so it's like 2 seasons. I think you go up north and suddenly you have 4 seasons. Because of that, you get a more hearty people. You also get a people that I think that there's something really important. If you can understand your seasons, you also somehow keep, you know, I'm not going to explain it very well. But if you understand your seasons and you experience the seasons, you are a more hardy person. People, you know, they have to go up on the roofs and they have to shovel off the snow and all that. But they also have to very quickly do the harvest in the summer, plant in the spring and do their thing in the summer. So they're different. But they're also, I found, even if you go, my wife and I and my daughter 3 years ago, we went up to Hokkaido and we drove through the north, and the people there were extremely, like, really helpful, really nice. But you also saw a lot less of the city influence. And if you go through small towns, and there are a lot of small towns, there are a lot more smaller businesses. And you saw, I mean, there's just, once you get away from the city, you're just going to see more of what's left of Japan, is what I would say. So yes, but that would go for even if you go south away from the big cities as well. So.
Okay, well, we have another one. Thank you. This is from Masumink. And the question is, can the guest tell what is the latest on the hikiomori herbivore culture lately? And says, arigato.
Okay, Masumink, I'm afraid I'm just going to, you're just going to blow me away here again. The hikikomori culture, from what I understand, is the type of people that are sort of withdrawing. They're kind of like if men going their own way went their own way in their own room, basically. It's kind of like that. And it's been around in Japan for quite a long time. People that are generally men who are either can't understand, they might be highly autistic or something like that. They can't understand the reason to live in a certain way they're living, and they just, I don't know how they live or whatever, but they live in their rooms a lot. They're very withdrawn. But I don't know about hikikomori and herbivore culture. And wait, hikiomori. Wait, hikiomori. You know what? I don't know what you're talking about, man.
Oh, well, it sounded good.
I read it wrong. Hey, I read it wrong. Masumink. Sorry, man.
Well, then we don't have I haven't seen another question pop up yet, but I have one in the time remaining that I wanted to ask you about. What do you make of the gender distinctions in the pronunciation? So, you know, you've got a guy who would be like, "Ohayo gozaimasu," right? And you'd have a woman who'd be, "Ohayo gozaimasu. Oh, genki desu ka?" Like, what is up with the way in which men speak like Toshiro Mifune? And women speak like this all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, clearly there's a cultural thing that survives there, despite the West, where you have a distinct way in which, I mean, like Turks, they have it a little bit, like, you know, like men would be, they'd say, "I don't believe it." They'd be like, "Inanmıyorum ya," and women would be like, "Ay inanmıyorum ya, Yahoo." So there's a distinction in some ways, persists in some areas, less so, between how men and women speak, for example, in a place like Turkey. But in Japan, it seems very distinct. Is it not there? And what do you make of it?
Whoa, Millennium woes. Millennium.
The Millennium Falcon is in the house. Colin, the Millennium Falcon.
He's gonna ask about cheese again. There's, by the way, a lot of cheese here. So how I would say it would be.
Woes in the house. Sorry.
Where's the bloody camera? There it is. All right. Actually, I shouldn't do that. Should I do that? How I would answer that would be there definitely is that sort of thing. However, I have noticed that the type of man that has a deep voice today in 2020 tends to be a man that either works with his hands or is in a position over other people. And even then, the amount of higher pitched Japanese voice of male voices that I hear in regular society it might be going up. I don't know, but there's the way you throw your voice in Japanese is a little bit different. You use more of the middle of your mouth and sometimes the front of your mouth. And because of that, you don't get the sort of guttural sounds. But a man who's, I suppose, I don't know if they're higher T or just more masculine or more traditional, will have definitely that. They're like, I can't do it like you do it better than I do. No, they'll talk like that. But I don't meet so many. My wife's father talks like that. But the men around him, even the ones, his understudy who is going to take over the company in some years, he talks with the more, I don't know if it's a more modern or if it's just like a higher pitched sounding voice. But another thing that is quite interesting is these guys, when you hear Japanese shout, like even if they got a really deep voice, when they shout, they throw it with a really high pitch. And maybe one of the reasons is because it goes farther. The voice goes farther that way.
It's like Roman orators. And you can even listen to old footage of like English politicians getting up on top of a car to give a speech. Auditor, you can hear it. They make it high pitched because it does carry, yeah.
That's true. Even Uncle A, when he spoke in private, it was much deeper than we spoke from the platform. But with women, my wife is from the middle of Japan, Osaka, and there are women who speak with higher pitched voices down there. But it appears that more women who are from that area speak with a little bit deeper voices. They won't speak as deep because the Japanese is mouth in the center of the mouth. Because of that, you're not going to get the guttural sounds from it anyway. But my guess is it just the higher pitched sound. Now, if it's you walk in a store and they're like, "Irashaimase, nani, kono drink ikaga desu ka?" They do that because it makes them sound the higher pitched voice coming at perfect pitch in terms of like the speed of it and all that is going to make it sound, I guess it kind of you go from the outside world where you're hearing like disjointed sounds, cars, etc. You come into a shop and then suddenly the air changes is my guess. And so when you're a male voice will do it, a female voice will do it. When they're in a subservient position, the voice goes up.
Right.
When they're in a more dominant position, the voice may go down. But with females, I think it could just be a feminine thing, as well as also where they are in Japan. I've noticed that here in Tokyo, if you hear women speak, they do speak with a higher pitch. In fact, when we were living in Korea, we came back and my wife had just taken a date with a girlfriend of hers that she hadn't seen in some years, and she came back to the room, our hotel room, and she was suddenly speaking like an octave higher than usual. And I was like, who is this? And it was because she was around someone from Tokyo, and she was meeting her Japanese. And so when we started speaking in Japanese after her date was over, she was still emulating the voice of her friend.
Well, that speaks of collective conformity, though I have noticed that just naturally, like if I'm talking to a Southerner, then my pace and I'll slow down and I'll come up with a little bit more of a twang on it, whereas I'll tighten up a little bit if I'm talking to someone from England. It's just natural. It's like a speech is a song, and you want to kind of match so that there's some degree of harmonization. Okay, so there are regional differences. And there is a certain amount of subservience in the pitch shifts, but it sounds to me as though there still is a cultural reflection of the sexual dimorphism.
When speaking Japanese, yes.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, the only way if I were to ever end up with a Japanese woman, I would throw her out of the house if she did not paint her teeth black in the good old classic fashion. I want the blackened teeth. If I don't get the blackened teeth, I don't want it. I want the full cowabunga. I want all of it. I want the blackened teeth, powdered white face. And
You
I
wanted
like
to crawl on the ceiling as well, or?
Well, no, but I do like the idea that her hair could come alive and do things. You know, the symbolism of hair in Japan is it's very alive. Like I talked about earlier, if it's at all in disarray, it means that the character is going insane. You know, if one long strand falls down, you never know what's going to happen with them. Yeah. But, okay. All right. Well, I guess we're coming up on the end here. I want to thank you. We've gone shot past 2 hours. Very interesting to speak with you. Thank you very much for taking time out. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you don't know this is Nathan's birthday. So wish him a birthday in the chat. Please say thank you for him going to this trouble. He reached out to me to come up with this topic. It's a very interesting one for me. It'd be fun to maybe see if anybody can find Japanese nationalists, because it would be interesting to dig deeper into this subject. I feel like my taste for further information has been whetted, so that the time has come for me to my appetite for considerations has been triggered. So yes. Let us see what we can find out about Japan, that it doesn't involve, like Mishima, having to cut his guts out. Yeah, so please, everyone, thank our guest. For the time being, as I understand it, the only channel he has up is FAUXTAKU Lounge, and that is spelled FAUXTAKU LOUNGE. You can find him on Twitter with that same spelling, FAUXTAKU Lounge, but with an at in front of it. He is our friend from the land of the rising sun, Nathan. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. And yeah, I think that does it for me. Hang with us, Nathan, here. We could talk for a second after we wrap this thing up. But thanks.
Can I say one thing in parting?
Yes, please do.
All right,
Pardon
guys,
me.
you guys listen to this guy's channel. Around Thursday or Wednesday or Friday, can't remember, last week, I found out that he wrote books. So I picked up, I'm going to screw up the pronunciation, Vindulum. No.
Oh, you mean this book?
Vinculum.
Funny, you should mention this book.
Yeah.
This is the Shill book. Yes, my science fiction book. Yes.
Okay,
available on Amazon.
Yeah, that's where I purchased it for my Kindle. I have been buying and reading various literature, fiction, whatever you want to call it. Some of it I would from various YouTube personalities that I follow over the years, and I haven't found one that I've liked. Now, on Thursday, that's how to soften, and this is probably not a good way to intro this, but that's how I approached your book at first. However, listening to your channel now, I guess off and on, I think the first time I heard it was about 6 months ago, so I'm a newcomer. Then I subscribed either a month or month and a half ago properly. I thought I had subscribed already, but I didn't. And I've listened to maybe 6, 7 videos, and as well as your podcast where you have a guest on. And I knew that you chose your words more carefully. I knew that you had a different sort of personality. But when I started reading this book, it was like, how do I describe it? Okay, so some people now, as far as I understand, this is your first book. I have no idea. But some people who are writing their first book try to be super edgy. And at first I thought, is that what's going on? But then I started reading, no. There's this edge that just defines the world, and almost like you can immediately picture what a person looks like, and it's very important, I think. You can immediately picture what's going on around, but there's not too much going on around. There's not too much ancillary stuff that's motion that's detracting from what's going on. The conversations are natural. Immediately the world, I'm gonna kind of blow something here. So there's no books, evidently. There's no books, like hard books. And there's this guy, and his job is to track down hard books instead of ebooks. It's good. I'm only 10% in.
Genius.
I'm only 10% in.
Did you want to fit genius in there somewhere? I mean, it sounded to me like you did want to say genius. Like genius would be a part of this description, wouldn't it?
Listen,
shockingly good. Was that what you wanted to say?
I'll go.
I'm getting it in my ear here. We're getting a signal from the producer. Shockingly good.
Shockingly good. The book is shockingly good. Shockingly good. Yeah, it actually. I'm like I said, I'm only 8% in, and at the moment, I'm only having time to read it as I go to sleep. but gosh, it's good. It's
Right
good.
on. Well,
And the first one I've bought, not only from the UT people that I followed that I've really liked, or okay, let me soften the blow, but I've liked it all. Second, I would compare it, like I read a lot of speculative fiction is what I read generally. I read some of the people from A Special Tribe, like Cory Doctorow. I read my favorites are Kurt Vonnegut. Actually, my favorite book is Mother Night. I even read the classics of science fiction with Asimov and, of course, Dune, etc. What is the other stuff I read recently? You know what? Forget it. All I got to say is this. This occupies a special place.
Genius.
You're not a YouTuber, man. You're not a YouTuber. You're an author.
Genius. I like it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, I'm fucking around, but thank you very much. I only hope that you reach the end and still feel the same way. So let's maybe revisit, but I'm not going to do it publicly. Like this opening, the genius and the rest, the shockingly good nature of my writing, purchase it on Amazon, the shockingly good nature of it. I'm glad I caught you at the beginning of the book. I think we'll talk privately at the end of the book and see if you feel the same way. I probably don't want to publicize your reaction when you get to the end. Okay, well then, thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sticking with it. I am Semi. Oh, and thank you, Woes, for stopping in and lending this semblance of quality to my channel. That's always welcome. And whoever might be lurking in the background, thanks to you all. And I have. Oh yeah, I should announce. Where's my little calendar? I think it's on the 10th. I have some other things that I want to arrange, but I have at least one event locked in, and I should tell you guys about it now. I have a great clip of Tim's that I'm going to be posting the Sunday, Monday, somewhere right in there. It's on pathologizing warriors. That's going to be very interesting, coming up just in a matter of a day or two, maybe basically when the sun rises for me again, which isn't far away now. And then on Saturday, the 10th, I have an interview with Frody from Guide to Culture and Scanza Forum. We'll be talking about some things. I look forward to that. So please drop in for it. Ladies and gentlemen, that does it for this evening. I am Semi-Agog, and I am out.